So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it was a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, everybody. We are here with the after show. We started a little bit early because we all assembled and we seemed ready to talk. I am, of course, the Dapper Dino. We have with us here Rose, as well as TD Lane, RJ, and Deadly Dakota. I know these people probably don't need much of an introduction, especially if you just came from the debate. But I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves anyway. So, starting with Rose.
Hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on your after show, The Dapper Dinosaur. My name is Rose, and my channel is called the Rose 777 channel, where I just like to question absolutely everything. And so I came into the debate tonight on the side of the dinosaur hoax, and I was really impressed with all of your knowledge, and I'm just here to ask more questions and learn more.
Awesome. And TD Lane?
I'm TD Lane. I am here because I found the debate quite enjoyable. I mean, I'm not always for MGD. I had a good laugh at that. And I had some commentary that I thought I'd share.
Okay. RJ?
Yeah, well, since you, Dapper, and 2D are representing the avialans and diapsids, I'm here to represent the synapsid mammalia.
Oh, well, thank you. You guys were vastly underrepresented during most of the Mesozoic, so it's very, very much appreciated.
We were just walking those directions. Now where it's our chance.
Okay, and Dakota?
Just hi.
Okay, fair enough. So before we came here, Rose and I were in the previous call, and we decided that, well, I mean, Rose decided, let's be honest, this was Rose was like, oh no, you know what, I am coming on the after show. And so the big thing that we wanted to get done first is Rose had a bunch of questions, and also I'm seeing that we've added Jason. And Jason, why don't you introduce yourself? Because we just did quick introductions.
Sure. I'm Jason from Crow 777 Radio. I'm the co-host, and I write a lot of the materials. And we've done 200... I don't know. How many are we on now, honey?
272.
There we
Wow.
go. 272 episodes.
That is impressive. My longest running series just hit 45. So good job, guys.
Thanks.
That's awesome. So, okay. Now, Jason, I know you have some questions, and I know Rose does, and I'm going to let you two kind of decide how you're going to ask these questions and whatnot. And this is very informal, we're just hanging out and chatting. So, which one of you would like to ask your first question about dinosaurs and whatnot?
Sure. Okay. Well, my understanding of the dinosaur hoax argument was that actually no skulls have been found. And this was based on research years ago. And so after the show, I went over to Jason and we went onto Google and we're just searching for different skulls. And I think that you brought up a Triceratops, right, Jason?
Triceratops in 2019, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking to myself, gosh, maybe it was after the dinosaur hoax that they came up with all these, fake skulls or something. But I just wanted to ask you about what is the truth, in your opinion, about dinosaur skulls, when they've been discovered, how they've been discovered, and is there any way that you can prove to me, as someone who's just brand new into this research, how could one prove that these big dinosaur skulls are actually real and not a fabricated lie?
Well, so there's a few things. One is that the first dinosaur to be discovered and later recognized as such was Megaloceros, and it was primarily known from a very well-preserved, mostly intact skull. So essentially a dinosaur skull is the first thing that science ever found of dinosaurs. Also, if you look at any number of various, you call these so a lot of times fossils come on what's called a slab, right? So they don't fully extract the entire bone, usually because it's been somewhat crushed, and so they expose part of it, and they keep the underneath of it sort of inside the rock. Many of these that you can find in museums as actual, still the original, because fossil slabs are easier to put in a museum. You just put some glass over it, problem solved, do in fact have skulls. So for instance, the Berlin specimen of Archaeopteryx has a well-preserved, if somewhat flattened skull. Recently, there was a nodosaur found, it was Boreal pelta, if I remember correctly, in Canada, and it had, not only did it preserve the skull, it also preserved a lot of granted petrified, but skin, osteoderms. It was very, very similar to the animal's actual life appearance, to the point that we actually were able to determine what color its skin was based on preserved structures from the skin called melanosomes, which carry color information. We did scanning electron microscopes on these, and so we now know that it was sort of a reddish, rusty brown color on top, and it faded to sort of a creamier color underneath. That had a skull. T-Rex remains are frequently found with skulls, but there are certain groups of dinosaurs for whom skulls are rarer. A big one is the sauropods, so the big long neck guys. And one of the reasons for this is that as part of a weight-saving mechanism, and because, their skulls were just so high up off the ground, they weren't typically
The head drops
injured.
off when they die.
Well, there's that, but also the skulls themselves were made of thin struts of bone for a lot of sauropods, so they just easily get crushed and lost.
Yeah.
But that is not the case for many of the heavier skulled
Don't forget
organisms.
Triceratops.
Oh yeah, Triceratops horns are actually...
They're giant skulls. They were initially known primarily by their skulls. It was hard to find the postcranial because the body was much smaller. But Triceratops, that's one of the biggest skulls of any dinosaur.
Yep.
And boy, are they relatively easy to preserve.
The first
Just any animal, period, actually.
the first known Triceratops specimen was primarily the upper part of the skull. It was mostly horns and frill and not much else. Of course, we've found more.
I seriously wonder where the whole idea of no dinosaur skulls have ever been found. Like, where did this idea come from that is so prominent all over the internet?
Other than to
why
say
are
that,
people saying this?
so all I can say is that sometimes things come up on the internet that are not well source checked, and then they run rampant. I think one of my favorite examples, both that explains this and that is an example of it, is there's a quotation that floats around the internet that says if you tell a big enough lie often enough, people will believe it. It's often attributed to a certain... Yes, it's usually attributed to Hitler, but he didn't say that. A similar phrase was mentioned by Goebbels, his chief of propaganda, but even that doesn't mix. And so people still believe that this is an authentic quote, but it both explains why ideas like this can come about, as well as is an example of it. Yeah, sometimes things just get said and repeated and not checked. And that's been a problem for, humanity for all time.
Right. Now, if I wanted to take the position, like, I don't believe what I see on the internet with these skulls, other than me doing what you suggested, which is try to gain access to the dinosaur bones behind the scenes, like, how would I try to go about proving that these skulls are real if I didn't find them myself?
So one thing is you don't need to do a lot of behind the scenes to get access to some real dinosaur skulls. If you want to take your own measurements, that may need some negotiation. But another one is you can simply go to places where dinosaur fossils are common. There are places in the United States and Canada, and I'm sure other places around the world. I just don't know all of them, where you can find fossils that have not been fully excavated and are still in their original position in the rock. Usually, a wooden or a concrete structure has been built around the site to protect it from weather. But you can still find places where original dinosaur fossils.
I have a very good
skulls.
example of that, actually, Dapper.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The La Brea tar pits here in California.
Not dinosaurs,
it's
but
not
same
dinosaurs,
idea.
but it has example of mammals because one of the pits that they excavated is just covered over now, and it still has all the original bones and stuff there.
Yeah. So there are a number of places where you can just see dinosaurs in situ, not even having been removed to a museum, because rather than bringing them to a museum, they basically brought the museum to the dinosaurs.
Does that include a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull or a Triceratops skull? This is what I really want. I want to be able to interact with one of these massive dinosaur skulls, maybe. And I love the fact that it's still embedded in the earth, because to me, if I saw that, you can't really argue that someone put together a bunch of bones of other animals and put them, like they say that they do in the museums. So how hard do you think it would be for me to actually interact with one of those massive skulls like a Triceratops or a Tyrannosaurus?
So it's going to depend exactly what you mean by interact. If you want to do something like under supervision, take some measurements, that probably wouldn't be terribly difficult. You would have to negotiate with someone who is curating some collection that includes the particular specimen that you want to examine. But if you just want to...
That kind of thing, generally?
I'm sorry?
Are they open about that kind of thing generally?
Yeah, generally, if you're... This is the kind of thing that, you don't just show up at the museum. You need to do some emailing and things like that. But generally, museums are interested in allowing people to be able to have access to their collections, because the reason you put a collection in a museum is for it to be publicly available. That's why there's a rule in paleontology that says privately held fossils are not to be described in literature, because they're not publicly available. Now, publicly available doesn't quite mean the same thing as you can walk in off the street. It's sort of like the White House is available for public tours, but you can't just show up and barge in, right? Like, there's security questions and, like, who's accessing, what do you actually want to do? Do you want to blow it up with dynamite? Well, no. Do you want to take a caliper and measure the horn thickness at the distal end? Yeah, sure, fine, that's okay. So, but if those aren't options, there are places where you can find various on-display original skulls in various museums where you can take a look at the original skull. Usually they're not mounted on the full skeleton, they're usually kept separately just because they're super heavy. Because, I mean, it's basically a boulder in terms of, like, its mass and weight. You're trying to hang a boulder off the ceiling. It's probably not a good idea. So they put them in a separate display. So yeah, basically I would say any species that you want to look at the skull for, look into the literature describing the skulls, find out where those specimens are housed, and then you can probably, with some effort, get access to them. And the other thing is, any dinosaur skull that is real and in the ground is evidence that it's not made up. So even if it's not a Triceratops skull, if it's, say, a Edmontosaurus skull or a Allosaurus skull, well, we know some of those dinosaurs had to have been real things because this is the actual bone in the ground right now.
We just got some decent Allosaurus fragilis material not too long ago, didn't we?
Yeah, actually, if you're into dinosaurs, Allosaurus is... So there are more Allosaurus skeletons than pretty much any other single genus of dinosaur. They're just all over the place in the United States. Allosaurus is everywhere.
I'm not really familiar with what that looks like, but if I were to find that that skull myself, what would tell me that that was an actual dinosaur and not just a lizard skull of some other species from more recent time?
So this is one of those areas where you really want to dig into comparative anatomy and the morphological use of taxonomy, or how you use morphology and taxonomy. But I can give you a few things that can help you differentiate a lizard skull from a dinosaur skull. So one thing is dinosaur teeth fit into sockets, similar to your teeth. But lizard skulls don't have sockets for the teeth. The teeth actually erupt from a little groove around what you would think of as the gum line, and they don't have individual sockets. So if you find a skull with individual sockets for the teeth, you know it's not a lizard. There are a few other things. So dinosaurs have additional openings in their skull that keep them light that lizards don't have. And so these would include one that's in front of the orbits where the eyes go. It's called the antorbital fenestra. Some dinosaurs also have a promaxillary fenestra in front of that. Another big thing is there's an opening in the skull that lizards have that dinosaurs don't. So if you look carefully at the top of a lizard skull, there's a little hole above the brain, and that is an area that allows limited amounts of light to hit the pineal gland because it's photosensitive, and it helps regulate the lizard's circadian rhythms. But dinosaurs, being diurnal, primarily regulated their circadian rhythms, even to this day, based on just their eyes. And so they don't have this parietal foramen, is what it's called. It's a little hole in the top of the skull. There are also a few other minor characteristics, but if you found a skull that had those openings, had those teeth, as a layperson, you could definitely say that this is at the very least much more closely related to dinosaurs than to lizards, and is definitely not a lizard. There are a few other animals that are very close to dinosaurs that technically have some of these features, but they're still not lizards. To be very sure, you'd want to be able to place it into a well-known dinosaur group, and if you couldn't do either, then you would probably have to hold out judgment and just say that it's some kind of archosaur, and you can't say yet which kind, whether it's a dinosaur or a pseudosuchian or something like that.
Wow.
Cool.
Fascinating. That is so cool.
Has there been any, what's the word I would want to use? Let's just say fraud over the years that would even lead people to question the validity in the first place?
No, really, the only major instance of fraud that comes up is basically people in certain areas where fossils are a big business who will then stitch together other fossils into a composite. But what you get then is a chimera, not a fabrication. And a chimera is the term in paleontology for when you think you have a whole fossil of a particular organism, but it turns out some parts of it are actually from a different organism, whether one or more. And it happens occasionally. You'll get some closer related organisms, or you'll get some bones that are not very diagnostic. So like, there's a whole broad range of reptiles of similar sizes that have sort of similar shaped-ish ribs. So if you ended up accidentally getting like, a rib from some other large animal mixed into this, you might end up finding, okay, we have to throw this rib out. So most of the hoaxes end up being basically people just gluing together fossils like Archaeoraptor. And generally, the scientific community is very good at discovering these. For one thing, there won't be a matching counter slab when you do that, which is, I talked in the debate about the slab where you have the bones exposed partially. Well, that comes after you basically chop that rock in half, and what you have is a counter slab where there's an impression of the same bones.
Right.
So if you don't have a matching counter slab to the slab, that's an indication this is probably a hoax. You can also check the matrix, which is the rock surrounding the bones. If the matrix doesn't match, well, that's a problem. You can also check for an abrupt discontinuity in things like if it's stitched one end of the spine to the other, like Archaeoraptor. You can check to see, do the vertebrae actually make sense? They follow one from the other? Because vertebrae tend to slowly change their shape as you go down the skeleton from the head down to the tail. So if there's an abrupt change, that's suspicious. And so those were some of the reasons that Archaeoraptor was detected, was because, the matrix didn't match the counters. There was no available counter slab that matched. And when examined closely, the vertebrae didn't really make sense. And so it was very quickly determined by every professional who looked at it that this was a fake just made to make some money by some person in China who, quite frankly, could toil in the fields for a year, or he could glue two dinosaurs together and make a whole bunch of money that way. And I mean, I can't blame that guy, because the areas these come from are very, very poor areas. So
they got it rough over there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What about, could these things possibly be explained in any other way, shape, or form? Or is there literally no scientist on the earth that could possibly say, hey, this could be whale bones, or this could be a hippopotamus, or this, whatever. Right. Some other large creature.
One of the things is that dinosaur bones are very distinctive. They're highly pneumatized, which means that basically extensions of the respiratory system, so basically branches of the lung, go into almost all of the long bones of dinosaurs. So they're full of these large air sacs. And additionally, they also have this sort of lattice structure, rather than just being solid bone, which is the case for most other animals. You have very solid bone with only small pockets around there where various osteocytes are going to be living and things like that. Dinosaur bones are almost all empty space in life, even outside of these air sacs that are in the bones. So from the outside, if you only had part of a dinosaur bone, it might be easy to distinguish it, or it might be easy to confuse it with, say, a whale bone or something. But once you have a cross-section of it, you have to not know enough about bones to say in order to make the mistake. If you know anything about the osteology of tetrapods, which is, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, things like that, there's no way to mistake those two bones.
Okay, fair enough. Rose, what else you got? I wasn't in the debate.
Yeah, the only other thing that we didn't really get to, which is one of the big commonly talked about aspects of the dinosaur hoax argument, is the fact that there was the whole bone wars back then between those two dudes. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And
it was Edward Drinker Cope and Charles Othniel Marsh.
Right. And so it seemed like, so I saw that the motive there was that they were just having a competition with each other, which was driving them to discover all of these bones. Is there any way that we can verify that the bones that they discovered were legitimate?
So there, with the potential exception of a few places where there was some dynamite sabotage from one side to the other.
Yeah,
which did happen. There were some bombings during the Bone Wars, which was
again.
Yeah, but
both of them. Both of them, I consider them both bad scientists.
So they were dishonest, and they're pretty much giving a bad name to paleontology.
They certainly gave a bad name to paleontology. However, most of their finds are still housed in museums, and you can still, after going through the proper channels and get permission and stuff, still actually see almost all of these original finds that they have found. And very few of the taxa that they named have ever been overturned because we still have these specimens. So while they were sneaky and certainly much more violent than I would like for scientists to be, their actual work on describing these fossils has generally stood up pretty well. You still end up seeing paleontology papers that will reference Cope and Marsh because they were the ones who originally described whatever taxon is being discussed. So the vast majority of their finds are still available and have largely held up as at least authentic finds of dinosaurs. Now, as we've learned more about dinosaurs, we know some of their descriptions or their predictions were inaccurate to varying degrees, and sometimes they would both find the same animal and they would both try to give it a name that was different, and then you had to sort through, okay, well, who found it first? And we have to give it that name. But no, generally speaking, there is no evidence that these finds were themselves fraudulent. It's just that, you know, sometimes scientists can be jerks too. That doesn't technically make their work bad. It just makes them bad.
Yeah, it seemed like I did read quite a bit about that when we did the original episode, and I remember it was like a great big pissing contest for a while.
Yeah, the Bone Wars, it's simultaneously embarrassing and also a treasure trove because there was just so much discovered, but also, like, come on, guys, don't dynamite your rival's camp. I feel like that's a pretty basic rule.
Yeah, if I may, the Bone Wars are just a gigantic baculum measuring contest.
Yes.
Ooh.
That's exactly what I thought of it. Yep.
There you go, bringing out the obscure osteology.
Okay, well, I'm fighting off the yawns. I wish that we had actually started on time because I would probably be able to stay longer now. But I am so happy that we met, and
Absolutely.
I would love to do more streams with you in the future. And also, I mean, this might be pushing it a little bit, but I think it would be so cool if, like, we went and gained access together of dinosaur skull and looked at it together, like live streamed it or something.
I mean, it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility. You know,
I just can't believe you haven't done like that already, like going in and like live streaming yourself. Like, would they let you live stream while looking at the skulls?
It's possible. It depends on exactly what the security measures are. They usually do allow filming, but I'm not sure if they would allow it live. So.
They should, though, in my opinion. That would be suspicious if they didn't.
I think the reason that they have questions about it live is that they can't guarantee that you might not try to show ways to circumvent their security measures by, like, filming people entering, like, say, keypad codes or anything like that, or where they keep keys for various drawers and things like that. Because it is true that they're under lock and key in the sense of, like, you know, you can't just walk in. You have to ask permission, and they're going to monitor you to make sure you don't damage anything. Because you have to remember, just like an art museum, every fossil is unique.
Yeah, and
it's basically to keep people from stealing stuff.
Yeah,
There are jerks that will do that.
Unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Rose, I know you have to get going, but Jason, do you have any further questions, or?
Not off the top of my head, I probably would be more able to do so if I haven't done this episode in, like, 4 or 5 years now, so it's not.
It's episode
on my mind
55. If you wanted to listen to the episode that Jason wrote on the dinosaur hoax, that's episode 55 of Crow 777 Radio. It would be cool if you listened to that.
Okay.
And then we had a conversation about it afterwards, like a rebuttal.
Thank you for telling me, because I did look at your channel, and I saw that there were quite a large number of videos, and I just said, I can't hunt for the one dinosaur one. I just can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was only one, so yeah, it would have been quite the hunt, and it was early on too. That was like really early on when I first started doing them with Crow. So we did a whole slew of like really interesting topics right in a row. So it's
I got to the channel. I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know that I have 300 hours to go hunt this down.
And I did my best. Like, when we do topics like this, and obviously that's bucking the mainstream, which is something we do a lot. I do try. I'm a very scientific-minded person. I mean, obviously you don't know me at all, but like I'm a very logical thinker. I look for evidence, and I try and be as objective as possible. It's like, okay, so this notion has been put out there. What can I find on both sides, and what can I bring to the table to discuss this openly? Like, okay. I'm not like a lot of flat Earth people, for instance, are very hardcore. Like it's almost religious with them, and I'm not like that. I'm like, no, I see some inconsistencies that really need some answers. That's the way I look at things, and why I even would consider a topic that bucks the mainstream. It's like, hey, I see things that bother me. Something doesn't seem right here, and I'm not a moron, so I can't just explain it away as like I'm too stupid to understand.
Right. Well, Jason, if you're willing to stick around for a little bit, I actually do have some questions that I think I would like to ask you, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay.
All right. I'm out. I'm
All right.
if I'm gonna lay down and watch.
Have a wonderful night, Rose. It was very nice to meet you. Thank you very
Good
much.
night. So nice to meet you. Thank you. Cheers, everyone.
Bye. All right. So, Jason, I think my first question is, so for most people, the existence of dinosaurs is similar to, say, the existence of trees, right? They might not be as common, but you can simply go places and look at them. At least dead ones. And while, yes, it is a case where sometimes some of those bones are replicas, they are replicas of bones, they aren't sculptures. So I guess for me, the big question is, where do you first get the idea that maybe this thing that most people simply take as like, well, I've seen it, it's right there, you can point to it, might not actually be a thing that exists?
Again, I'm trying to remember what my key points were because I wrote this 4 or 5 years ago. I know a lot of it got tied up with a lot of the fraud going around with Standard Oil and all that, how they made up a whole bunch of hoopla to create enforced scarcity and things like that. Like oil is really not a fossil fuel; it's an abiotic thing. That it's actually a creation of the earth, which there's a lot of evidence for. And because actually in the episode I tied that all together. Only half of it is about all of the history of the finding of dinosaurs and all that, and then I took it into the Rockefellers and the Standard Oil and all that because they did an extreme amount of basically fraudulent science to convince people that oil was something that's scarcity, because of course they controlled 90+% of the petroleum market in the United States, and then of course they had interests in the rest of the world. So I kind of tied those things together in the sense that there was a lot of interest by people with a lot of money to make sure that people believed in this concept that now is going in their gas tanks.
Okay. So I think there's a couple things. One is, even if we grant that oil companies, by and large, are lying about oil, say, that doesn't really change anything about the fact that if we find a bone in the ground, we know that it belonged to an organism. And if we find, say 70% of a skeleton, we've got a pretty darn good idea of what that organism would have looked like. Within, a margin of error, because that's science, right? There's always going to be that margin for error. But
right.
So my first one is, I don't see how, even if it were true that oil companies are just lying about oil, that means that dinosaurs don't exist. But the other thing, I would like to know, are you familiar with facies modeling?
I remember that term, but please explain it to me again.
So facies modeling is a geological method that is used by petroleum geologists to help oil companies drill and successfully find oil. Because I'm sure you're well aware of the phenomenon of a dry well, where an oil company just don't hit anything.
Right.
Generally speaking, your average oil company is only a few dry wells away from bankruptcy. Because while they do in fact have great, large amounts of income, their profit margins are actually pretty thin, and every loss they take is actually a pretty big deal. So facies modeling requires an old Earth, and it requires evolution to be operating, and it also requires that oil actually be biotic in nature in order to successfully predict where they will find sufficiently sized oil wells. And so core samples are taken of rocks and whatnot in the area because, of course, a small core sample is way less expensive than a full oil drill. Mm-hmm. And then based on things like index fossils, evident thermal history of the rocks, things like that, then geologists can predict where they find oil. But if oil is abiotic, then facies modeling simply wouldn't work, and either there simply wouldn't be dry wells because oil would be a worldwide thing, or using facies modeling would be no better than throwing darts at a map on the wall. But that is not what happens. And one of the reasons we know this is because when an oil company tried to go without facies modeling, it was Zion Oil and Gas, they drilled, I believe, 4 dry wells in a row. And then finally they decided to give up, and instead of using the Bible to find oil, they used standard geology, and they managed to actually get a well that actually bothered to produce.
Well, wow. Who would figure, right? To use a little science.
Yeah, but the problem that I have there is that the science depends on the model of fossil fuels being primarily biological in source. Not generally crushed up dinosaurs, because that's not really how you get oil. That's a misconception. And yes, it does bother me that is a common misconception. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I have those 2 points, whereas one, it doesn't follow that if oil is abiotic, that dinosaurs don't exist. And also, there's really good reason to think, just based on how the economics of the oil industry works, that it has to be biotic, at least mostly.
Well, it's hydrocarbons, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, that's true. And to be fair, hydrocarbons can form naturally. They do so fairly regularly. But there's also complex hydrocarbons in organizations that don't typically form spontaneously. So, for instance, say you go to like Titan, which is full of hydrocarbons, but it's mostly things like ethane and some methane and ammonia and those kinds of hydrocarbons. Whereas there are complex hydrocarbon chains in crude oil that are not the kinds of things that simply form when you get enough hydrogen and carbon together and you mix them up a little bit. These are the kinds of things that typically are the result of biological processes.
Yeah. From what I understand, most oil is formed by marine organisms.
A lot of it's marine
plants.
or a lot of it's plants.
And, marine plants and microorganisms, albeit I'm not entirely sure, as I haven't gotten to that point in geology. I expect that'll be a more advanced class that goes over oil planning.
Well, I'm pulling up my note. I found my notes from a couple years back, and I'm trying to see what I even put, because I've done over 200 episodes since then. So
Yeah, no, it's hard to keep track. I totally
I
get it.
remember what salient points I pulled up. But the first one where I actually got into this after I did a couple of definitions was, before even a toenail was found and presented to the scientific community, the word Dinosauria was coined by Sir Richard Owen of the Royal Society in 1842. He was also the superintendent of the British Museum Natural History Department when he put forth the notion. As of this point, nothing had been found. It was pure conjecture and theory. This was during the time when theories on evolution and natural selection were taking hold, and the mechanics of which were being hotly debated. Darwin's book on the origin of species wouldn't be released until 1859. Owen was merely speculating on their possible existence in the long past. Owen is one of the many figures with direct ties to the upper echelon of the British aristocracy. He is said to have been a very driven individual and was even hated by some. One of those persons was biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, who was the grandfather of Aldous and Julian Huxley.
Okay, so now repeat for me the year that Richard Owen invented the word dinosaur.
1842?
Okay, so here's one of my problems with that. The first dinosaur that was discovered by, I guess we could call modern science, right? Because, if someone finds a bone in 300 BC, it's not going to make its way into scientific literature.
No, it's probably going to go in his belly.
Yeah, so, but the first dinosaur was discovered not after 1844, but in 1676.
I just went by what I found when I just did a whole bunch of looking up. I tried to.
That's fair, but also when you search first dinosaur, usually Megalosaurus will come up. And also the next dinosaur found was Iguanodon, which was found in the 1820s.
Oh yeah, Iguanodons. The story of Iguanodon's general change over time.
It's simply a factual error to say that when Richard Owen made up the word dinosaur, that there hadn't been dinosaur remains already found. He found it he created this description to describe a group of organisms that were being found at the time, because they needed a new word to describe this new group. Because they clearly weren't just lizards, but they also weren't apparently any modern group. And so in order to refer to them, they needed a word. Richard Owens being sort of the premier paleontologist / comparative anatomy dude in basically the world at the time. Although, like Cope and Marsh, gigantic jerk. Horrible
he was a
human
massive
being.
egotist and a jerk, but he was brilliant for his time. And he got into a massive pissing match with Charles Darwin. It's actually a great read.
It is actually a lot of fun.
Stole a lot of his work anyway. So.
There's a lot of that 18th century polite scientists ponage going on. It's that thing where you read between the lines and you're just like, ooh, that's harsh, but it comes across in this very prim and proper tone. Yeah, I love that stuff. But anyway, so it just is a factual error to say that the first dinosaur remains were found after the word dinosaur was was coined. The word was coined to describe this group because as a result of certain characteristics, especially in the basically the pelvic structure and legs, those are some of the biggest areas where we see this uniqueness among dinosaurs. On the basis mostly of a lot of that stuff, Richard Owen was like, well, I think these groups are affiliated with each other in terms of their structure. Because remember, Owen didn't believe in common descent. He was a progressive creationist, but he still believed that God created along certain templates. And he thought that Dinosaur was a template that God had created along, but that had been later discarded in favor of other mammal templates that God later replaced the dinosaurs with. But because he saw that commonality between these different dinosaurs that had already been discovered, he named Dinosauria and gave some criteria by which you could identify a dinosaur based on the organisms that he chose as representing the group in the first place. Obviously, from video from 2 years ago, I don't expect you to go back and, try to edit it or something, but it is definitely not the case that the first dinosaur finds post-date.
That's fair enough. I can only go by what I was able to document. And I usually try and cross-reference and make sure things are correct. But like I said, I can only go by what I found. I mean, I'm extremely objective. I'm not married to anything. If I find evidence one way or the other, I present it, and that's just the way I've always been. I try to be as fair as possible at anything. I find a lot of things to be very interesting, and there is no denying that the upper echelons of the whatever you want to call them, the elite, the bougie assholes who like to control the world, they lie to us about a lot of stuff. So just nothing surprises me at this point. After uncovering document after document where they blatantly admit the things that they do to us, So it's the fact that this might just be one more thing just doesn't surprise me.
Well, I will say that I am sympathetic to the idea that there are reasons to mistrust certain members of, say, various government apparatuses or whatnot. I don't typically get into my politics, but I think people who have viewed me long enough know that I'm no big fan of people like politicians or the various business contacts that they have that use their contacts with politicians to get unfair advantages. But the thing is that dinosaurs aren't really a big business in terms of the science. They are in terms of Hollywood, but the science that's being done about dinosaurs is not being done for lots of money. In fact, paleontologists frequently have second jobs.
Yeah.
Because paleontology, unless you're doing geology for oil companies, digging up dinosaurs is not a way to make a living. It's really not.
No.
The only exception is if you own land that has dinosaurs and you're having people pay you for the dinosaurs. But also, real quick, we have a $5 super chat from Rodent, no last name, who says, sorry I missed most of the after show. Great job. You destroyed them. Well, thank you, Rodent, no last name. I appreciate that. And you didn't really miss most of it. I think we've only gone through a bit over a quarter of my planned time. I'm probably going to go about 2 hours, so don't worry about it too much. But one thing that I do wonder is, so paleontology, it's actually pretty easy to find the original sources. So many of the original sources in paleontology are at this point just completely public domain because they were done so long ago.
Paleontology is actually a lot more open access than geology. Geology is painfully closed.
Now, this is a question that I asked Alex in the debate, and I think I'll ask you too. When was the last time you read a peer-reviewed paleontology paper about any dinosaur?
Well, I've never done that. I just went by mainstream. I did look a bunch of articles, I remember, like National Geographic, things like that.
See, that's the reason I ask, because when you say mainstream articles, when you're talking to, say, a scientist or someone who's very much into the science aspect as opposed to the popular aspect, the mainstream sources are not National Geographic or, IFL Science or, any of these other things. The mainstream science is,
the way.
It's the papers that come out in journals like Nature or the Proceedings of the Royal Academy of Sciences or...
I've gotten a lot more into that stuff in more recent years. That's actually what I usually do on my Wednesday live streams with Wayne McCroy. We usually break down white papers or official documents coming from official sources, things like that. A lot of these earlier ones was me learning how to be a talk show host. And
hey, that's... and look, I mean, maybe it's time to revisit the dinosaur question.
It might be, like I said, I'm not married to anything. Like, I don't have an official stake in anything. I actually think dinosaurs are pretty cool. Always have. Loved them when I was a kid. I knew quite a lot about them. As a kid, used to have the dinosaur books like most of us did. I like all this stuff. The problem was I saw some fraud, and it was just an interesting topic, and we did a show on it.
Well, it is the fraud part interests me because you accept that there are authentic, valuable historical paintings, right? Those exist.
I would assume so.
But you're also aware that art fraud is a big business.
Yes, I would assume so.
So I don't see why that the idea that fossil fraud might be a thing negates large swaths of paleontology by itself, because it seems to me that, logically speaking, in order to show that fraud-worthy sort of debunked large swaths of, say, paleontology, you would have to show somehow that most of the specimens on which the science is based were themselves fraudulent, but most of them weren't collected for profit. So I don't see where the motive would be. So, for instance, not that long ago, it just sticks out in my mind for some reason, I read a paper that was almost entirely describing toe bones, basically, of ornithomimids found in, I believe it was the Lance Formation in North America. I guarantee you no one got rich talking about claw bones from an obscure dinosaur you've never heard of. No one did. So, do you think that was fraud?
No, I sincerely think I'm probably the wrong person to be coming at with all this stuff, because I'm open-minded enough to see evidence from any side of anything.
Okay.
Like I'm not going to have a lot of answers to quote unquote debate you, because I'm not interested in debating. I'm interested in facts.
I mean, that's fair.
I actually have a little thing. Literature is pretty pretty deep, and I'm going to post one of my actually favorite papers released in technical literature, which is.
Oh, you want a screen share?
I'm just going to post a link to it.
Okay.
Because screen sharing is janky. Which is the paper that basically put the nail in the coffin of Nanotyrannus.
Oh, rest in peace, Nanotyrannus. I'm going to put it in the chat. Oh, you just did. Never mind.
Welcome to your life as a juvenile Tyrannosaurus.
Yeah, you'll live on in our imaginations, and also as an actual valid anatomy, because, I mean, organisms with that anatomy existed, they just weren't adults. Oh.
Okay, I got this link. So what is this state? So I don't take the time to read it right now.
So this is basically just a relatively recent paper that is taking a look at there was a dubious organism called Nanotyrannus, which was a small tyrannosaur, like about the size of a large dog. And in this paper, it's sort of the final nail in the coffin, saying that no, Nanotyrannus isn't a separate organism; it's just juvenile or baby T-Rex.
Gotcha.
And yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, so that is one of the problems with a lot of paleontology, is we only get snapshots of any given organism. You can't watch an organism grow up in paleontology. You have to get various life stages of the same organism to conclude how it grew. And sometimes that's easy. Like for some trilobites, we have like every single instar. Because, I mean...
Well, that would be easier.
Yeah. Right. But with dinosaurs, it can be tricky. Is this, a new organism? And also, Zach Brannigan sent me a €2 super sticker that is a 1-up with what looks like a... is that a hippo?
Is that
It looks like Hungry Hippo.
It does, and it's eating 1-ups. So thank you for giving me an extra life.
Yeah.
I will try not to squander my extra life. Trying to make that trick jump over in some level just to get the big coin. No, I'm just going to go get to the flagpole. Come on.
Let me reverse the questioning here, though. If someone put to you, could you argue the other side, that dinosaurs were frauded in some way? Would you have any evidence that, if let's say you and Alex switched places and you had to defend the sorry, dinosaurs didn't exist as described kind of thing, could you do it? Is there any evidence that could support that notion? Or is it absolutely what the mainstream says is absolutely what it is?
So if the proposition is dinosaurs did not exist and I have to take the affirmative, I'm sure I could come up with arguments, but I don't believe that I could do so honestly.
Okay, that's a fair enough answer.
Yeah, so the problem is that as someone who does bother to dig into actual, paleontology literature, who has gone to, museums, seen the actual bones in some cases. Oh, and also Silfredo Sarabia sent a $149 US super sticker, which is a hot dog, which, man, that's actually kind of making me hungry. Why are you guys doing this to me? Now I'm getting hungry. And $1.49 isn't enough for me to get a hot dog after YouTube takes their take. Come on, guys.
That's true.
Yeah, you need like another $1 to get one from Costco.
Exactly.
But maybe you can get some at the store.
But anyway, so I mean, I could probably come up with some arguments, most of which would have to. The best arguments I could come up with would be that rather than trying to argue that the animals are fake themselves, I might try to argue that Dinosauria as a concept is incoherent because the organisms don't actually form a natural group. And I could probably come up with reasons that I know would be sketchy at best, but that I could try to make the argument. That's probably the closest I could come to coming up with a robust argument as to why dinosaurs don't exist. The problem is that basically, for me, dinosaurs exist in the same way that cats do. I've seen them. I've touched both live and fossil dinosaurs. I mean,
I have dinosaurs visit my bird feeder every day.
yeah, so it's one of those problems where it's like, in order to conclude that dinosaurs are fake, I would have to conclude that basically my senses are utterly untrustworthy, and they seem to get me by pretty well in day-to-day life, so I have reason to think that my senses are reasonably accurate. And I've firsthand encountered dinosaurs in multiple ways, so there's not a whole lot of openness. It's sort of like, as far as I know, you don't believe in space.
I challenge the notions. See, that's the thing. I kind of get lobbed into the extremes of the points of view of conspiracy, and I can only say this for the millionth and 1th time. I am extremely objective, and I see things that bother me, and I want answers to them.
Right.
That doesn't mean that everything on one side is a lie and everything, like, I'm not like that. That's just not the way I work.
Right.
I find all these topics very interesting. When I see evidence of fraud, and NASA is the one place you will find fraud all over the place, which I'm far more questioning of stuff with NASA than I am of say, a topic like this.
All right, but let's say that while you're skeptical of space, if someone somehow got you into a rocket, took you to the moon, and everything was as NASA explained it to you when you came back, and this is, of course, a hypothetical. Let's say that happened. Mm-hmm. It would be very hard for you to then say after that, well, I'm still going to deny space because, you ended up in a rocket, you took off, you went into orbit, you experienced the free fall weightlessness, you ended up on the moon where there was only a quarter of the gravity, you could check the pressure gauges, and, you felt your suit expand when you stepped out. If all of this had actually happened, it would, to you, just be impossible for you to successfully defend the idea that space is fake after something like that happened. Not saying it will, but if it did, right, it would be very hard for you to defend that.
I will give you a real-world example where you're absolutely correct. This is the thing. I'm probably the worst conspiracy theorist you're ever going to try and debate with because I don't want to debate you. I'm not interested. I'm interested in hearing about things that I can look at from an objective point of view and make my own decision. But I'll give you a great example because I'm also a musician and I'm a gearhead. I'm really into audio technology. And there's a YouTube channel I listen to sometimes from a guy who runs a studio. He's a heavy metal guy. He's very vulgar sometimes. But he literally made the claim and said he even ran tests where he said that changing the tubes in an amplifier, any amplifier, does not change the sound. Well, I have a bag of vintage tubes going all the way back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
You really are into this, huh? Because if you're collecting tubes, that's a dedication.
Well, I'm older. I'm 47, so it's like I've been doing this since I was a kid. So as I found things over the years, and I have a JCM 900 Marshall head, and I have literally taken them out one at a time and switched the sockets around, different variants of tubes, and I can absolutely hear a difference, like audibly hear frequency differences, which this guy swore. He's like, you're a fucking moron if you think you can hear a difference. It's like, sorry,
That's our F-bomb.
And there's our one F-bomb that we get for free on the stream.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it.
Quoting this guy, that's what he said. You're an effing moron if you think you can hear a difference. You don't know what you're talking about. Well, the RCA tubes that were actually worth quite a lot of money that I had,
yeah,
those distinctly changed the entire tonal frequency. Now, did it still sound like the same amp? Of course.
Right.
But did it shift the frequency enough that the microphone I had on it that I could audibly hear a difference?
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I want to read a super chat.
I want
to read a super chat real quick. It's from Rodent No Last Name again. Thank you very much. He says, also, thank you. I learned something from the debate. Aquatic-oriented organisms surviving the extinction event. I speculate that water as a thermal buffer would be a contributing factor. That's certainly possible, although I also don't want to overstate it. There was a lot of devastation to a lot of aquatic ecosystems. And just this year, I believe, a new fossil bed was described from the Hell Creek Formation that was almost certainly directly caused by the Chicxulub impact crater.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that they realize this is because, there's bits of meteor embedded in the flesh of the organisms preserved, which is
That's fun.
pretty hardcore. They were basically pelted with just like buckshot of meteor, and like
One of the interesting little things is that the end Cretaceous extinction event obviously seems to have basically boned the ammonites completely.
Yeah, the ammonites didn't fare too well. I suspect it may have had something to do with having trouble laying down their shells in a newly acidified ocean. So
yeah, ocean acidification is nasty, and that probably made things rather difficult for some of those large mosasaurs that fed primarily on ammonites.
Yeah, it's true. Ammonites made up a large portion of a lot of mosasaur, which goes back to the whole like collapse of the food chain, right? If your prey is gone, well, you're not going to be much longer for this world. Sorry.
It's a bit like how due to say deer population collapses in let's say Eastern America, the cougars there just kind of like went, oh crap.
Yeah. But so I guess that's sort of why if I were to try to defend the dinosaurs are a hoax position, it would almost be impossible for me to do it, honestly. It would sort of be like trying to defend bees are a hoax. It's like, well, I mean, my uncle kept beehives. I've seen a bee farm. I've looked into like special display hives. I've been stung by bees. How do I defend that? It's a part of my everyday experience. And while in 2020, actual dinosaur bones have not been a part of my regular experience, that has not always been the case. I've seen actual dinosaur skulls. I've seen actual dinosaur, basically any bone you care to name. I've seen largely intact slabs with essentially an entire dinosaur on it. I mean, I've read papers on many of these specimens. I've publicly disagreed with a few papers on some of these specimens, and in at least one case, after I publicly disagreed, in fact, the authors did retract their paper and said, "Whoops, we got it wrong." And I said, I knew it. I know what you're talking about. Yep, it did come up in the debate, but it's not terribly important to get into it now. But yeah, so for me, I just don't understand what it would take for me to say that dinosaurs don't exist, because they just do. I just go and look at them. And there's one right there.
I can absolutely take you at your word. I don't have any reason to think that you would be trying to do anything otherwise. Like I said, I am not married to this concept. I can even send you my notes, and if things are incorrect, then they're incorrect. And
well, one interesting thing was Rose had said that she would like to have a few other live streams with me about either this topic or some related topics. And since, of course, you co-operate the channel? Is it a joint venture? I'm not sure exactly how it works.
Well, Rose is my girlfriend, and she helps with bookings and things like that. But as far as Crow 777 Radio, Crow is my partner. Like he started it, and I joined shortly afterwards.
Well, I mean, I would have to probably have at least some interaction with this Crow first. But if you wanted to be on with the various interactions that Rose had suggested, I'd certainly be okay with that, as long as she is. Which, being in a relationship, I'm assuming she probably will be. But I don't want to speak for her while she's not here.
Sure. Now, what were the other topics that she was referring to?
There was some stuff about things like some flat Earth concepts, and I think archaeology came up, although that might have just been a confusion from a super chat between archaeology and paleontology, so maybe I'm just making that one up. Which, by the way, if you're in the audience right now, please don't mix up archaeology and paleontology. Archaeology is digging up human artifacts and things like that.
Different.
And
you remember explain your video about Indiana Jones.
One is Indiana Jones, one is not.
Right. Indiana Jones wasn't digging up dinosaurs. And people who dig up dinosaurs don't dig up golden idols that they steal from people who still own the temple, which, Yeah, it turns out Indiana Jones didn't follow any of the ethical guidelines in archaeology.
He's kind of a bad archaeologist.
Indiana Jones is trying to make a buck.
Yeah,
Great
basically,
explainer video.
Indiana Jones would be in jail for a very long time if any of those things actually happened.
Dapper. It belongs in a museum.
But the thing is, so here's one of the big things. A lot of the things that he takes are he takes from temples and whatnot that are still in the territory of the native peoples that built them, which means they own them.
Yeah.
If you want to explore a temple that's still inhabited by the natives, you need their permission.
You know, like the first 10 minutes of the first movie.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, you know that idol you just took? It belongs to these people who are surrounding you. It's theirs, not yours. I don't care how much you want it in the museum. They own it. So, yeah, it would be like someone trying to, like, just grab a forklift and, like, just grab the statue of Abraham Lincoln from the Lincoln Memorial and just send it over to the Louvre. And you're like, what are you doing? And they're like, but it belongs in a museum. I'm like, okay, but it's still not yours. You can't just take it. Yeah. So,
I mean, tell that to America, who literally just stole a bunch of crap from Iraq.
well, I mean,
Yeah, that does happen.
yeah, that does happen.
Yeah.
But I will say that
Heck, we learned from the best. The British did it first.
they did.
That's true. That's fair.
Although the British have recently repatriated a few things from the British Museum and whatnot, so there's some start
We're looking
towards
at you.
returning things. Now, well, here's what I'm waiting for. When someone returns the horses on the top of St. Andrews in Venice to the Eastern Orthodox community in Turkey, then I'll be impressed with the whole repatriation thing, because I guarantee you those aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
There's a lot of stuff in Venice that should go back to Constantinople.
Yeah, just loot it.
Wait, it's Constantinople.
The British tell the people on their islands, just ask the Scottish about the Stone of Scone.
Yeah, I mean, look, we could go all day on stolen artifacts. It's a huge thing. But yeah, don't mix up archaeology and paleontology. They're very, very different. The only commonality is they both involve digging, which lots of things involve digging.
That's true.
Yeah.
Paleontology involves more hammer and pickaxe than a lot of chisel. A lot of chisel.
Yeah, and
than shovel.
you know what? It still involves dynamite every once in a while.
Occasionally.
Not as much as it used to, but sometimes
Actually,
got to clear over.
you want to hear something funny? Because I'm part of a paleo society here in Southern California, and I actually need a lighter hammer because my rock hammer is too heavy. It's unwieldy and doesn't work for my chisels. Yeah,
Well,
it's too heavy.
time to get a better hammer, I guess.
Yeah. It's decent for breaking rocks, but I don't want to break rocks all the time. Sometimes I need more precision.
Hold on. Apocalypse Bear in the chat is a bear after my own heart, because then he put in Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. To which I would follow up with, why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks.
Love that song.
It is a great song, and if you haven't seen it already, check out season 1 of The Umbrella Academy on Netflix, because they use that as the song for a rather awesome fight scene, and you would not think that it works, because it does not sound like a fight song, but no, trust me, it works really well.
It's also a great party song.
Yeah, I would say
It's
that...
a really good party song.
And this is super off topic, but yes, The Umbrella Academy has some of the best scoring of anything that I have ever seen, movie or TV show-wise. So check it out, if only for the inventive use of unusual songs in the context that they're used. So, yeah, it is...
Where's the topic again?
Yeah, the topic was the dinosaurs being fake and whether or not they're fake, and also, you know, the debate. But also, for $2.99 from Vandali 1998, did they make Kent seem smart by comparison? I would say Alex did, and Rose did not. I don't think it's going to be any surprise to anyone that saw the debate that Alex basically is an impossible person to have a conversation with. His statements rarely even make internal logical sense. Never mind whether or not they correspond to the actual facts of the universe. Yeah, his statements very rarely even correspond to actual thoughts, is what I would say. So I would say that I'm probably not super open to having further discussions with Alex. I don't see a point.
Yeah.
He's just going to yell incoherent nonsense.
Yes.
On the other hand, I would say that Rose was generally speaking, very, very nice to interact with. She had questions. She actually paid attention to answers, even if she didn't agree with them. And was willing to at least engage with the actual dialogue as it presented itself to her, which puts her, I would say, in some aspects, a step ahead of Kent Hovind, whereas he is somewhere in between, I would say, Rose and Alex in terms of his willingness to listen to people while they talk and then say things that make sense.
And who is that?
Kent Hovind is a person I also debated, and he is the subject of my longest-running show, where it's called Kent with Bent, and my friend Bent Hovind, no relation, we come on and we have a little bit of a drinking game about Kent Hovind videos, and we live debunk them while getting sloshed.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, hey, check it out. It's on Tuesdays. It's almost every Tuesday. Second Tuesday of the month, I do an alternate show with another YouTuber, Erica, the Guts at Gibbon. We take a look at Kent Hovind's son, Eric, because he has some of the same stuff, and also it gives my co-host Bent Hovind a bit of a break, and it's always fun to hang out with Erica, because Erica is always a joy to hang out with, basically. She's a great person. If you're not already subscribed to her, go subscribe to Guts at Gibbon, everyone in the chat. Anyway, so yeah, Kent Hovind he's an old school creationist. He was most popular in the 80s and 90s, and then he ended up going to prison for failure to file payroll taxes and structuring. And then while he was in there, he committed mail fraud and threatened public officials. So
and now he's attempting to sue the U.S. government for, like, what was it again?
Yeah, he's suing the U.S. government for around $530 million. And
Yes, because he's angry. He got caught.
Looks like he's buying hostages.
yeah, he's also suing his defense attorney. So that's fun.
And his own son.
Yes, and his own son.
Well, maybe he thinks he could beat the defense attorney because the defense attorney obviously didn't win for him.
Well, one of the problems is that the defense that Kent Hovind insisted on going with was essentially to say that Kent Hovind didn't understand the charges, and neither the jury nor the judge were impressed with that defense.
Yeah, I don't think that works.
No. Yeah, look, I've got my own issues with the judicial system in the United States, but I'm definitely going to say that if your primary argument is like, I don't get it, man, it's just not going to be a good day for you.
I don't care if you get it or not. As
Kent is not the
I
sharpest
tell you, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Kent is not the sharpest fork in a knife drawer.
No.
Yeah, I'm getting that hit. Well, creationism is one thing. Like, I'm very openly spiritual, actually, but I do not subscribe to anything, and I don't see any evidence for the world poofed into existence 6,000 years ago. I see the exact opposite, in fact.
I also do not see any evidence of that, and yeah, also see the exact opposite. So it's nice to see that we have some point of agreement there.
We probably have most points of agreement. I'm a very poor conspiracy theorist as far as being the nut job in his mommy's basement wearing a tinfoil hat. I'm anything but.
You know what?
I'm on
East Coast time.
I'm gonna have to call it a night.
Oh, night, Deadly.
Oh yeah, it's almost one
thing.
you.
So I was gonna say, until recently, I had, my mom's basement was actually pretty nice. It was finished, and it had its own separate AC and a separate bathroom and kitchen. And then, long after I moved out, but they then moved, and I don't even know if their new house has a basement. So even if I wanted to live in their basement, I'm not sure I could. Plus, they also, my mom and my dad and my sister and her husband are all on the deed to that property. So I would also be living in my sister's basement at that point.
I mean, you're also like 2 meters tall and like how many feet long again?
Not entirely 2 meters, like 1.8. Oh, come on, man. I'm about 3
Close
meters
enough.
long. 3-ish meters
Also,
long.
Dapper, I feel like we got so far off course that we got caught in the warp storm and ended up in Ultramar when we intended to go to Cadia.
Well, just blame it on the crazy conspiracy theorist in the room.
Yeah, plus, have you been to Cadia lately? I would much rather be in Ultramar.
I mean, the chanting's kind of making my head spin.
There isn't even a chanting anymore. The thing's gone. It's a pile of debris.
No,
It
in
got all
Ultramar.
around. Oh, Ultramar.
Ultramar.
Oh, yeah, okay. But anyway, we're not going to keep talking about Ultramar. We'll talk about dinosaurs and stuff. All right, so,
You thought I
Jason,
couldn't bring up 40k, but I can.
regardless of whether or not dinosaurs are real, which one's your favorite?
When I was a little kid, the Stegosaurus we got to choose, and I think I was in 3rd grade at the time. We got to choose. We everybody was making their own, and that's the one I chose to make was Stegosaurus. Nowadays, that's a good question. I usually like to see what's new and exciting, what's being found, because primarily what I leaned towards, if indeed dinosaurs were a fraud, it would probably be the largest of the large ones.
Mhm.
Like I certainly don't have a problem with the concept that there are creatures that have gone extinct. I mean, I think that's kind of evident that happens. Marine life, especially, is very, very, very easy to prove. Trilobites being an incredibly easy example.
Yeah,
I have some trilobites. They're
I
pretty
do too.
neat.
All right, that's fair. Stegosaurus is a good call. I like Stegosaurus.
I think Stegosaurus is a pretty neat dinosaur. It's a shame that group seems to have just.
Yeah, they just bit it at the end of Jurassic.
I got it had just a
pretty
killer
hard.
defense mechanism.
Yeah.
So, T. Lane, what's yours? And is it the secretary bird?
Oh, I mean, I do like secretary birds. I also quite like golden eagles. I enjoy velociraptor, albeit I kind of like Dakota raptor more. I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm going to go with Dakota raptor for like non-avian dinosaur though.
Okay.
Were velociraptors a newer thing? Because I remember when I first saw Jurassic Park in the early 90s, whenever that was, I was like, what are these? I'd never heard of these.
They weren't. So they belong to a group of dinosaurs called dromaeosaurs, and they were not popular in terms of like public media yet, because everyone was still all about Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus Rex and stuff.
Right.
And this Jurassic Park is really the thing that popularized them, but it did not invent them. The animals in Jurassic Park are actually mostly based on a larger animal called Deinonychus, and Michael Crichton had read a book suggesting that Velociraptor might have been the same as Deinonychus, just a younger version, and he liked the name Velociraptor better, and I agree with him, it is a better name. And
Yes.
so he just called his Deinonychus Velociraptors, and then the movie kind of ran with that and even scaled up the Deinonychus to make them even scarier. Actual Velociraptors were about the size of a poodle.
A lot of actual velociraptors would have been cuddly, except for the fact that they probably would have acted like geese and attempted to murder you.
Yeah, they probably weren't friendly, but a good swift kick probably could have ended a Velociraptor if you had some steel toe boots on.
Mighty legs.
But also, we have a 199 super chat from Witsit Gets It, and he says...
Oh,
sorry. I just want to get this super chat, because, you know, Witsit Gets It just gave me nearly $2 US to say, which came first, dinosaurs or Darwinism? So I'm going to say that there's two versions of this question. I'm going to answer them both. Of course, in terms of, in reality, which was the first thing that existed, dinosaurs existed long before any human concepts did, because dinosaurs long predate humans. But if you're talking about in terms of scientific thought, which one was a part of the scientific consensus first, it would be dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were discovered, described, and named before the publication of The Origin of Species, and even before Darwin set out on his second voyage of the Beagle, because he wasn't there for the first voyage. He was just the naturalist for the second one. So yes, dinosaurs are a much older concept, both in reality as actual things, as well as in the history of science, than Darwinian evolution is.
that's also what I came across when I researched it.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Darwin made predictions about dinosaurs, as did some of his, I suppose, allies. One of them being that birds may, in fact, have evolved from dinosaurs. And then before Charles Darwin actually died, one of the major fossils confirming that, Archaeopteryx, which from the skeleton is almost identical to any other just regular old dinosaur that you could think of, but was unusual because it was preserved with feathers. And this was a pretty significant vindication of that prediction. Because the... Darwin hadn't been the first to notice this, but people had noticed if you look at bird feet, they are extremely similar to the dinosaur feet that they were finding, especially of the meat-eating dinosaurs, the theropods. As it turns out, birds are theropods. And Wissett Gets It says, my question is about how dinosaurs fit into evolution. I mean, so Dinosauria is just another clade within evolution. So, I mean, it's modern members of the clade are birds. That's the only modern examples we have of the clade. But dinosaurs diverged from within Ornithodira in the... Well, it probably first started to emerge in the Middle Triassic, but we get our first good dinosaur fossils in the Late Triassic. And we're also getting Dinosauriformes and Dinosauromorphes before that, which are things that are almost dinosaurs, but not quite there. And that's emerging from this general area where after the almost complete collapse of the synapsid megafauna, after the and Permian extinction, the new, drier, hotter environment is being taken over by the, at the time, better adapted archosaurs and other reptiles who are starting to dominate the megafauna. And so within this group, we have a group called ornithodyrans, which are the bird-ankled organisms, which include dinosaurs, their close relatives, and pterosaurs. And so from within that, a particular group becomes what we call dinosaurs. So they fit in the same way essentially anything else fits into evolution. We have a good idea when they arrived, where they arrived. In fact, some of the earliest dinosaurs are found right near me, a few hours away. There is a town called Holbrook, Arizona, which is about as close as you can get to the Chinle Formation in terms of towns. Other than Holbrook, there's like a couple gas stations and a fossil shop nearby. That's basically it. And yeah,
a gas station might as well be a notable location in the middle of nowhere, U.S.
In some places it is. I know several notable gas stations. So
a gas station is the most notable thing from after you get out of San Bernardino on your way to
actually
Reno, basically.
You're noting it because it actually exists.
So speaking of which, when if I'm driving between Phoenix and Albuquerque, there's a gas station I usually stop at on the Hopi Reservation because it's very convenient as to where I usually need to get gas and also when I about need lunch. But it has two goofy, like, pastel-colored, polka-dotted dinosaur statues out front, and like they look like someone made a statue of like the drawing of a dinosaur that like a 6-year-old made, and they're just adorable. They're absolutely adorable. Anyway, so Vandelli 1998 for 199 says the guy who named dinosaurs hated Darwin. That's true. Sir Richard Owen was a big opponent of evolutionary biology. He himself was an old Earth progressive creationist. So he thought that the Earth had been around for tens of millions of years, and that as time went on, God created successive faunas that he would populate the Earth with. Then he would sort of, I guess, get tired with the old ones, and he would say, okay, out with the old, in with the new, and you would have new templates that would come in and replace the old ones, and in this stepwise like ladder of God creating better and better organisms. I'm not sure why he thought that God needed to experiment like this. If God is, omniscient, you'd think he could just get it right the first time. But hey, I'm not here to defend Owen's creationism. But yeah, he was definitely not a fan of common descent or natural selection or any of these things. He was very much in the vein that God specially created organisms. He did it according to templates, and he improved his templates over time, which is a position you find almost not at all today. I don't think there's any more Owen-type old Earth progressive creationists. I would say it's probably a more honest position than a lot of young Earth creationists. But anyway, Owen was also a jerk. He was known to lie. So, for instance,
Christian.
Yeah, well, so he made false predictions about Archaeopteryx because the first specimen was found without a head. So he said that when the head was found, it would just be a normal bird's neck or bird head with a beak and no teeth and all the various bird characteristics. It turns out when the next specimen was found, nope, it was an extremely dinosaur head. It basically looked like a tiny, T-Rex skull. I'm exaggerating there, but like for a lay audience, that's roughly right.
It was basically indistinguishable from the later Compsognathus.
Yeah, the only real differences between Compsognathus and Archaeopteryx are mostly down to the size and shape of the hands.
Yeah.
You take out the hands, and it's very hard to distinguish the two. Mostly because both of them have pretty basal skeletons. But yeah,
and very generational. Excuse me, a generational difference between them as far as one came before the other.
I would actually have to double check the ages. I believe Darwin was a bit younger than Owen.
No, I meant with the two specimens.
Compsognathus? With the two specimens of Archaeopteryx? No, they're both from the Solnhofen Lagerstätten. So within our limits of measurement, they're basically from the same time.
Gotcha.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't rather closely related.
Compsognathus is actually not super closely related to Archaeopteryx. It's not even Maniraptoran, if I remember correctly. But one of the problems is that the advanced Maniraptora, you get into a lot of really advanced stuff with things like, integument structure and stuff. Compsognathus probably didn't have veined feathers. It probably had what we call type 1 or maybe type 2 protofeathers, where type 1 is just a hollow filament, and type 2 is a hollow filament with a tuft of strands at the end. We don't actually have good preserved integument for Compsognathus, but it actually was not all that close within Coelurosauria to Archaeopteryx. It's just that
You reminded me, we might have some really weird type 1 feathers on ceratopsids.
yeah, we have a
Really weird.
we have some really good feathery bristles from Protoceratops. In fact, Protoceratops, we might have the best fossil of any dinosaur ever, with the possible exception of that Boreapelta from Canada. And Jason, I don't know if you know about this, but this specimen of Protoceratops has preserved the only known dinosaur butthole fossil. Yeah. So a paper was the first ever paper on the fossil of a dinosaur butt was published recently.
Now, that's actually interesting because what is it that they were able to determine about that? Was there anything about eating habits or the way it processed food or anything like that? Like, were there things to be determined that would not have been determined before because they didn't have such a thing available?
So I've not thoroughly gone through the entire paper. I have skimmed most of it, and this is actually something that happens with most papers. It turns out we were pretty much right all along about what we thought about dinosaur butts, which was that they were basically the same as crocodile or bird butts. They had a cloaca, which was used for all reproductive and excretory, from the digestive system functions. It was fleshy. It almost certainly emptied to the large intestines. And yeah, it's kind of what we were expecting, which you actually find a lot. In the debate, I pointed out that until recently, no Tyrannosaurus syrangular bone had been found. Well, why did we come up with the shape for the syrangular that we did in fossil mounts? It's like, well, because there's only so many shapes that really make sense, and we know what the syrangular bones of related organisms look like. Well, recently we found the first Tyrannosaurus syrangular bone, and it's exactly what we thought it was going to be.
Verified prediction.
Right.
And Alex's response to that was, see, it's fake.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that followed.
Logic did not follow.
And so that's...
I assumed the opposite, where like if it's kind of like having a puzzle and you're only missing one piece, well, I'm pretty sure you could determine the shape of that missing piece.
Right. Yeah. Alex's argument tended to be like, okay, we've got this 1,000-piece puzzle, and 50 pieces scattered around are missing. No way you can tell what the picture on the puzzle is. It's like, I think I can come up with some pretty good guesses as to what the complete picture should look like. Will I be 100% on point? No. But that also doesn't mean the puzzle doesn't exist, just because a few pieces are missing. And it also still doesn't mean that I don't know what those pieces likely look like. Yeah. I know what they should... Like, if I went hunting for them, and I found pieces of a different puzzle, I can be pretty darn certain that it's a different puzzle. And when I find pieces of this puzzle, I can be pretty darn certain I know that it's this puzzle, and we can fit them in where they go.
And if you can identify that the puzzle's picture is very similar to another puzzle's picture, then you have a better guess at what the picture looks like in full.
Although there is one trick, so this is a real thing about real world puzzles that doesn't work much in paleontology, but puzzle companies only have so many dies that they use to cut the puzzle pieces. So if you find two puzzles that use the same die, you can fit their pieces together. You can come up with a few crazy things. Because you think they make a unique die for every puzzle? No, they don't. But nature does, though. That's the thing about nature. As you progress through evolution, every single new clade is going to be unique, and it won't regress into an earlier clade so it can climb back up some other ladder on the tree of life. And so Witsit Gets It asks, anyway, can I jump on and ask a few questions? So actually, you know what? We only have 3 people in here. So that is not it. Give me a second. Right now, I'm about to put in the join link. I'm just going to put it in the chat, because you know what? I am the one who is the gatekeeper. If I don't want you in, you're not going to be in. So here you go. That is the join. When you join, I guess try to join as Witsit Gets It, because otherwise I won't know exactly who you are. And anyone else who gets in, I may let a few more other people in past Witsit Gets It, because he wants to ask questions, and I happen to know he disagrees with me. He is getting priority. I will say, however, Witsit Gets It, you do have to, be reasonably nice to talk to. Basically, don't be a faithful, honest, and true, or an Nephilim free, or an Alex. Be a Jason or a Rose.
Dapper, I had a thought, which is that dinosaur butts probably at the rear end of the thought in the paper. Aha.
Nice. But also that same find, the skin was so the skin was so well preserved that you know what a melanosome is?
I don't think so.
Have you heard of melanin?
Of course.
Okay, so I'm going to bring in Wits It Gets It. 1 second. It work? Here it is. Hey, Wits It Gets It. I just want to finish this real quick statement, then we'll get an intro from you and whatnot. So melanosomes are organelles that hold melanin. So when you see them, you know that that cell had that skin coloration chemical. And so this fossil Ceratosaurus was so not Ceratosaurus, sorry, Ceratopsian was so well preserved that while we could find the actual melanosomes on microscopes, even just looking at it, you could actually see the spots. We know the dinosaur had spots because we can see them on the fossil.
Cool.
So that was pretty cool. And Wits It Gets It, welcome. I think, this is definitely your first time on the channel. I think it's the first time we've ever talked directly.
Yeah, for sure. How's it going, bro?
Oh, it's going pretty well here. It's a nice, cool evening out in the desert.
Yeah. What's up, Jason? Jason's a legend.
Hey,
Nice.
what's up, man? Nice to meet you.
So, ask your questions, man. I would love to hear them.
All right. When I was asking about like how this all fits into evolution, right? So, well, what you'll have to say, I guess, the idea evolution is actually not even agreed upon theory, right?
I would disagree, but okay.
Natural selection is the commonly attributed idea to evolution, but that's actually not agreed upon. But my point is taking that idea, dinosaurs having a physical superiority over time, you would have to then invoke an extinction event. And an extinction event would have to happen, right, for this to all fit in with evolution as to it applies to us, right? Like us being here. The only way that we would be here would be basically a reset, right?
I'd say that's broadly correct. Although I would say that it's not that we've invoked an extinction event; it's that one is evident in the fossil record. We see at a certain point the landscape is dominated primarily by dinosaurs as the dominant macrofauna on land, at least. And then as you go up a bit higher, essentially all non-bird dinosaurs are gone. And by essentially, I just mean there's never been a non-bird dinosaur found above the end Cretaceous. And then we find a new fauna coming to dominate, including birds and mammals. And so it's not so much that we need to posit one as there is one evident in the fossil record, which has been recognized since before evolution was ever proposed.
I certainly don't dispute a cataclysmic event being the flood, right? That's the most historically accurate.
I would say it's the least historically accurate option.
Yeah.
At least those seriously entertained by anyone. I mean, sure, you could make up less likely scenarios, but
I guess we found like seashells on mountains, and
we have.
every ancient civilization recorded a flood.
No, they didn't. In fact, quite a few didn't.
Egypt.
Well, sure, not every, literally, right? But Egypt would be after the flood. So, some say before because they found 2 inches of sea salt in the pyramids or whatever. But really, my point here is right. So, we obviously have a superior intellect to other species, right? And so, were there humans evolving at the same time as dinosaurs and getting eaten, or did that just not happen?
There were ancestors to humans that were around at the time, but they were very much not much like humans. So primates, and of course,
primates, basically.
I'm about to get into primates, so Erica, please don't kill me.
Erica's done videos on this if you want to.
I'm about to trample into Erica's territory, and so Erica, please do not just come over and kill your dinosaur friend.
Ceratosaurus ripped apart by gibbons.
Seriously, this is just gonna be a pack of gibbons and like mandrills or something that just tear me apart for my inaccuracies here. But anyway, so the first identifiably primate organisms that we can really get are emerging well into the Cenozoic in North America, and they very quickly end up migrating across the Bering Land Bridge to Eurasia, subsequently going extinct in North America, but radiating to a great extent over the Old World to get into some of the most basal primates. We're giving rise to things like lorises and lemurs and their associated relatives at the time. And then at some point, after the arrival of actual simiiforms, one group ends up rafting over to the still closer South America and establishing the New World primates. And the Old World monkeys go on to diversify primarily in Africa and to some extent in Asia, from which then the hominoids, the apes, come about. But all of this is happening tens of millions of years after the Cretaceous extinction. So the animals that would have been human ancestors at the time would have essentially been sort of the ancestors of humans and rats. So that would have been quite a while ago, and it would not have been, other than having tendencies to, you know, be able to climb trees and burrow, so sort of like a chipmunk or a squirrel in terms of lifestyle, but not in terms of anatomy. That's what we would expect to see at the time of dinosaurs for human ancestors.
All right. I feel maybe I need to preface, you know, this next part. Like, I don't mean anything I'm saying disrespectful, right? I just disagree with you.
That's fine.
And I actually like really don't like when people are disrespectful. And if someone's respectful, I like to keep it that way, you know? So I'm not being disrespectful, but bluntly, I think this requires so many leaps of theoretical connections. It begins to get a little insane, right? Like, well, tens of millions of years, tens of billions of years. And, you know, you can argue as to the efficacy of these dating, but to ever tout that we know definitively that we're dating something that far back is, well, that would be pseudoscience, right? That falsely attributes itself to being science. Like, science, you have a naturally occurring observable phenomena. We don't have that with this. So this is inherently not scientific.
Well, we absolutely do. Fossils are themselves an observable phenomenon. You can simply
we can date. Radiometric dating's pretty easy to test. My favorite example is, would be Oclo, which is a natural nuclear reactor, which if, say, radiometric decay was different, would not function, basically.
Yeah, it would have had to have collapsed.
Yeah,
as a functioning reactor, which it
my second favorite option, which is for an actual historic date, is the eruption of Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii.
Mm-hmm.
That has been dated, and initially it was dated to around a decade within the event, as recorded. And then, with improvements to the system, they got it within a year via Argon.
So we're on the calendar year that is reported historically
it's
for
extremely impressive.
So the thing is that we do have observable phenomena. The isotope ratios in a rock is observable. The actual existence of fossils is observable. The actual rocks in which the fossils are found, which give us information about the depositional environment, is observable. And the fact is that all of these do not correspond to a recent global flood as a cause. They do all agree with the predictions of evolution as in terms of the modern synthesis, not necessarily in terms of Darwinism, because, you know, being an idea proposed in the, what was it, 1850s, T. Lane?
1859, the book was published.
Yeah, so we'll just go with 1860s to be, you know, around there, right? So,
it was
of course, any idea proposed in around 1860 or so is, if it stands up to any scrutiny now, it's going to have been with some modification because a lot of new evidence has come in.
Might need tweaking.
Right. Which is what science does.
Radioactive.
To be fair here, is that there's things about evolution that are still debated. There are specific. I think that's what Witzik gets at, might have been getting at, and it's something that Crow and I have discussed. Like that, there are things about evolution that are it's still just a theory. There are it's kind of like gravity. It's a theory, working theory.
The problem with just a theory is that a theory is about as high as it gets. There is actually nothing higher than a theory in science. A theory is right.
I'd say there are things that are just still hypotheses.
Right.
Yeah, requires it to be tested.
But there's only 3 of those, right?
I'm sorry, there was a lot of crosstalk and I couldn't hear. So
I mean,
I'd like to hear I think because Jason had a quick comment, and then if I have a quick response to that, that'll be great. But then I think Witsit Gets It has a more in-depth question. I want to get to that. So Jason, can you give that quick thing that you were just saying?
Oh, I was just trying to extrapolate that. I think what he was more getting at is that there are specifics about evolution that are still debated, and evolution is a very broad stroked concept for a lot of people, I think, and it's always evolving. To be funny, it's always evolving, and it's a theory, but it's a working theory until something better comes along. Because really, there's only one thing higher than that, which is a law, and there's only 3 laws in science. So it's again like gravity, where it's what they're going with until something else helps plugs that variable in the equation.
Well, I would say, I mean, atomic theory is also a theory, and there are debates in chemistry, but that doesn't mean that atoms don't exist.
Well, atoms are conceptual, though. Like when it comes, like it's conceptually like 99% empty, and you can't verify the material nature of an atom. We know the area of an atom, but
No, we can image atoms.
right, but we're actually imaging reflections.
Well, that's all
Right.
images are.
Right, but we're imaging reflections off
I
of an
mean,
energy of
when you
pressure
look at a table,
mediation.
you're looking at light reflecting off the table into your eye. So I don't see
Right,
why
but
that's a
with an
problem.
atom, we're looking at an area of pressure mediation. That's what we're looking at, an area of pressure mediation. And then we're assuming a material nature. And then when you get below the subatomic scale, it's super, super unverifiable. But I mean,
no, it's not. They release particles that can be detected at predicted ranges, and then when they are, that's confirmation of the standard model of,
Particle
quantum.
physics?
Yeah, quantum physics. That's the standard model of quantum physics is the best supported mathematically and observationally theory in all of science. There
Not
is
really. There's something called the virtual photon, the virtual particle that
which
says
are
that
predictions
something
of
pops
standard
in-
field theory.
It's saying that something pops in existence out of nothing.
Right, but that's
Quantum
verifiable.
Quantum field theory is actually a bit disruptive in modern science, and it's still trying to piece together particle physics, saying that there's a field that extends into the nothingness,
Right.
that
It's-
extends beyond the material. My point is that is inherently pseudoscience, but
How is
more
it
so
pseudoscientific?
with this.
I need you to explain that.
Yeah, like you to say that a field extends into nothing.
What
Like,
do you mean
what
by
is
nothing?
that? That's what I want to know.
Well, the thing is that scientists don't often talk about nothing. They'll talk about fields that extend through space-time, but space-time isn't nothing.
I don't want to get into this. I can. I mean, space is a conceptual idea of area void of material times the concept we came up with to quantify passing.
Space. When I say space, I don't mean necessarily something that has some kind of hypothetical vacuum. I literally mean the kind
Area.
of physical extent. Like you can move up, down, left, right, forward, and backwards. You therefore
Sure.
exist in a space, which may or may not be full of stuff. But that it exists itself means that there's something there, which can just be the coordinate system.
Well, up, down, left, right, those are all relative to us standing up and down.
Right, I'm just using them
yeah.
because I don't have easy terms. I mean, I can say X, Y, and Z axes, but that seems overly pedantic.
Yeah. There's
Well, that's what it would be called, right? But what I'm saying is like the X, Y, Z axis, like all three of those axes, those are just conceptual. That's how we are using. That's what we're using to quantify or describe something. Like math, that's abstract. It's just a language, right? So like whenever we say length, width, breadth, height, right? Those are descriptors that we've come up with, right? Like if I measured out at 12 inches and I called it a foot, well, if I called 6 inches a foot the first time we measured it, reality didn't change, just the constructs did, right? And that's what
Right.
space is. It's the idea of how we measure area, but space itself is the emptiness, right? Like if I have a car in a garage, the car isn't the space, it's the space around the car, right?
No, the car
So,
exists in space, and how much space
Exactly,
it occupies
exactly.
can
What
be
is-
measured objectively.
what is space? What is space though?
Well, space is just one of is the combination of three vectors, which are all orthogonal to each other, and you can set them at any particular starting point and use transformations to figure out, Oh, and Sal Cordova is here. Sal,
oh hi Sal.
look. It is great to have you
I
here.
missed a Zoom call for you, and I'm sad I did.
Oh, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you, Sal. Can you mute for a second and mute the stream? Yeah, thanks. Okay. In case anyone doesn't know, Sal is he is one of the creationists who I enjoy talking to. He is a big genetic entropy guy, and we're going to be discussing that
I do
at a
actually
later date
say-
on Modern Day Debate, and I'm sure it will be a friendly and cordial exchange. But we're going to duke it out. We're going to duke it out in the battleground of ideas, right, Sal?
Yes, sir. I apologize for the feedback. I'm still learning my way around StreamYard.
Oh, no worries.
I actually have to go, but I dropped in just
Oh.
to say hi. I apologize for not seeing your debate because I actually have been working on my channel. So I'm up to
Hey.
61 subscribers now.
Hey.
I'm at
which
least
is
one of them.
like-
I might be two of them.
Well, I wanted to thank you. So it's very kind of you to consider me as
Absolutely. Sal,
someone to have a discussion with on Modern Day
private-
Debate. It'll help build out my channel. So that's very kind of you. So I
Absolutely.
wanted to say thank you.
in the private chat, put your channel link in this internal private chat, and then I'll just have TD Lane post it in the live chat here, so people can go to your channel if they want to.
It will be one of my last actions.
And actually,
tonight.
Winston Gets It or Jason, if you want to do the same thing, we can also get your channels out there. So yeah, I don't want to make it seem like I'm not helping the other people with channels who are here. So please do.
No, you're good. It gets easier, Sal, as long as you can put out consistent content, then your numbers will
Yeah.
grow exponentially.
Yeah. And so Sal, wait a minute. You can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down because I know you're muted right now. But thumbs up, dinosaurs did exist. Thumbs down, dinosaurs did not exist.
I think they did exist, and I missed the debate. I mean, it's funny sometimes. There's things when sometimes people ask me things, I'm just like, that was accepted science, right? I mean, but when someone just kind of poses an opposing opinion, I'm just like, well, it kind of just stopped me in my track. I'm like, I'd be curious to hear the other side, I guess, unless it's just awful. I mean, when they're having these flat Earth debates, I'm like, okay, I don't believe it, but I would like to hear the arguments. And after about 10 minutes, I'm just like, nah, enough.
The problem with flat Earth, I'll be totally blunt about that, is who it is presenting the evidence. Because some people are extremely aggressive about it, and that bugs even me. And I'm right down the middle. It's like, hey, I see things that cannot get explained because I have a pretty good science background. That's what I've always been interested in since I was young, and I'm in my 40s now, so it's stuff I've been looking at for a long time. It is very good, I can tell you, to anyone to stay open-minded because things that are considered accepted science 100 years ago might not be tomorrow. It is just the nature of reality.
Well, one thing I would point out is that while there have been some pretty major advancements in science that have significantly changed the way that we see the world, the older theories generally don't end up getting erased. So, for instance, Einstein's field equations for general and special relativity are much more detailed than Newton's laws. However, almost everything that you're going to do, including most of the stuff that, we'll just say that NASA allegedly does, because I don't want to get into the whole NASA thing, almost all of that, assuming that all, the universe is as they say it was going to work just fine with Newton. You don't generally need much Einstein unless you're doing something like a communications network that needs to have, sub-second accuracy and synchronization. Or you're trying to do something like, measure the energy output of a distant quasar or something. For the most part, even outside human scales, Newton will do you just fine. And so
Einstein actually got his field equations from Maxwellian equations, which was with electromagnetic backing. The same exact equations. He just changed the conceptual backing.
Okay.
And actually, Newtonian physics had to be done away with because of the Michelson-Morley and Michelson-Gell experiments.
But it wasn't done away with. That's the thing. If you go to an architect and say, hey, are you using Einstein equations for energy for your load-bearing calculations? Or if you go to, say, someone who's calculating the impact force of a car crash, and you say, did you take into account the scaling factor on the basis of the inverse of the cube of the inverse of the square of the speed of light on the basis of, Einsteinian momentum equations? They're just gonna be like, no, I didn't, because the difference would be so small that no measurement I could take would tell the difference. So Newtonian mechanics and Newtonian physics are still alive and well. They're the typical physics that you use to do almost everything in life.
Well, man, I'm getting dragged in here, but Newtonian physics is antithetical almost to Einsteinian physics. Like, it has similar mathematical components, but
well, then why do the answers almost always come out to be essentially identical to a huge degree of precision?
Because on the local scale, all that is downward acceleration. That's all that's being like whenever you factor in.
What about the momentum equation?
Do what?
The momentum equation ignores gravity.
Okay, so yeah, but the momentum, it doesn't ignore gravity.
It does, because gravity isn't a factor there. There's mass, there's velocity, and momentum. Those are the only factors in the. Do you know the momentum equation?
Well, I want to know how, if you're moving on Earth, the gravity wouldn't be relevant.
Because if you're moving on Earth, that's just part of the sum of the forces involved, and so that will end up determining your velocity. But the momentum equation doesn't involve gravity.
Sure.
It has momentum equals mass times velocity squared.
Mass has gravity encompassed in it.
Great, but even if it didn't, the equation still stays the same. But momentum, under Einstein, has additional terms in order to account for what fraction of the speed it's going at, which is going to determine the relativistic mass versus the rest mass of the object. But when you're calculating the momentum of a truck barreling down towards you on the road, all those extra terms from Einstein are completely meaningless, as is to what degree gravity is contributing to the velocity vector. What all that
Yeah,
actually matters
you're
is
right
the
about
ultimate
that.
sum.
You're right about that, but mass itself is actually reifying gravity because it's the idea of it being pulled to the center of it, right? That's what mass is. So, like, without gravity, you don't have mass, right? So mass is just matter. The difference is gravity.
There's two ways to measure mass. Now, this is an open question in physics as to why it is that relativistic and accelerational mass, or sort of the resistance to acceleration mass, end up being a 1-to-1 ratio all across the universe as far as we can tell. That's an open question. But the fact is that the momentum equation, even if we ignore gravitational mass, we just pretend it doesn't exist. Or maybe it doesn't exist. We'll just go with some other concept of the universe. You cannot say that Einstein is based on gravity when some of his equations do not have anything based on gravity as a term. It's like telling me that my entire life is based on lemon meringue pies, even if I never eat one. It just doesn't work.
We'd have to be real specific here, right? Like, we're being a little vague. Like, Einsteinian physics is general relativity.
Well,
So he
it's general
proposed
relativity and special relativity.
Special relativity in 1905, right? And that's where he attributed constant speed to light. He then takes that constant speed of light and puts it in general relativity. But when people say Einsteinian physics, they're talking about general relativity. It's actually bundled in with special relativity, right? But the reason that we had to update it to general relativity, it was because of the Michelson-Morley experiment and the Michelson-Gale. It did not show the phase shift expected. So basically you had to say, like, when I set this cup down on my table, that the cup's going down while the table's going up. And then he had to take Lorentz contraction in whenever they looked at perpendicular light rays. They had to say that our apparatus was contracting, and that's why I didn't see a phase shift. So
are you
general
saying,
relativity was proposed out of necessity.
Are you saying that special relativity does not assume a constant speed of light for all observers?
No, it does. That's special relativity is where he attributed a constant speed to light.
Okay.
Yeah, but then he takes that constant speed and puts it in general relativity.
The problem is that Einstein didn't invent the idea of the constancy of the speed of light. That was an observed
You're correct.
fact.
Einstein didn't invent anything. All he did was take other people's stuff.
Well, whether or not that's true, it doesn't invalidate the theory. I'm not sure what the point that you're trying to make here is.
Well, this is my point. Like, when he took Maxwellian equations, like, the equations are true, but Maxwell, the one that came up with them, he had an electromagnetic conceptual backing. The only difference is the conceptual backing, right? So he knew there was an ether field with an electromagnetic field, but that could not be the case if the Earth was a ball that was spinning and shooting through space because of the Michelson-Morley experiment. Literally, it couldn't be. So they had to throw out the ether. They had to throw out the Maxwellian interpretation, take the equations. These were derivative of what we found. So the equations can't change, right? But he had to change it to where there isn't any type of background that would cause a phase shift. So he said it was basically empty, right? And this is where you get the idea of space and time. Space is a privation. It's emptiness. Time is, of course, not material.
Space is not a privation. It is a physical coordinate system. When you say space in terms of physics, we don't mean outer space, where there's no air or something. We literally just mean the physical coordinate system along which you can move physically as an object in the world.
Well, it's addressing what's beyond the physical perceivable material world.
But space is part of the physical perceivable world.
But it also is supposed to extend beyond that.
If it weren't part of the perceivable and material world, then it just isn't
right. We
possible
wouldn't have measured
to
it.
actually perceive it. You
So
can't
You don't measure space time.
You absolutely do.
That's
what clocks and rulers are for.
Clocks. We have a quantification that we call time. That comes from the sky, bro. Like, the sky resets. We have day and night cycle. That's where we got time.
We have atomic clocks.
Yeah, the SI unit of time is the second. It is now defined specifically on the basis of the oscillation rate of a photon of a particular wavelength. Or sorry, the oscillation. It was a cesium. I'm sorry. Yeah. So it is physically defined by an objective standard that has not been measured to vary based on other standards of time. So it is simply not true that time is based on the sky anymore. Now, granted, the sky is a convenient way to keep time. That's why many human time measurements are based on it, like, days and hours, because, well, it's one of the most obvious repeating cycles in human experience is the day-night cycle. And also the yearly cycle.
Itself, they reset every year.
For the most part, they do. There is a bit of a drift.
There's no most part. The stars come back and reset for all recordable history. They say there's a drift that's not perceivable because it takes millions of years.
We know, for instance, that Thuban was the North Star during the earliest parts of recorded history. It's simply not with the Egyptians.
The Egyptians recorded a different North Star?
Yes.
I do not think that is accurate, bro.
Okay, that's great.
So how do you know that it's not Polaris they recorded?
Because Polaris was a much brighter star that they also recorded at a different location.
So that's just you interpreting them taking the North Star and saying it was a different North Star, and this is based on the assumption
because
of
they made
11
star charts
vectors.
and they made exacting, well, not as exacting as they could, but they made calculations about which stars were how many degrees away from which other stars, which ones were which colors, and so it's not actually that hard to go back and correlate which stars they mean in Egyptian with which stars we get from various Greek names or Mesopotamian names or Arabic names, which is the three major sources for star names in terms of actual, stars that were given a specific name before modern astronomy decided to give most of them boring names that just come like HIP number.
I mean, dude, I'm just gonna have to disagree with you. We can agree to disagree, right? This is an interpretation based on their data. This is not some objective thing. You can say this, but it's objectively not an objective thing because what they did was they recorded that the stars reset constantly, right? And they constantly come back around. They actually built their monolithic structures based on that, and as did like all ancient civilizations that had megalithic and monolithic structures. And so it just resets, and that's what we know. But they say that we don't see a change because it takes millions of years because we're just such a big universe. And so it may look like the sky's moving and resetting, but I promise it's us moving and we're going 11 vectors. And
okay, but you're just literally wrong when you say that recorded history doesn't involve any precession.
Dapper,
it just
I'm
does.
going to guess and say that you've read actual Egyptology literature on this.
Yeah, one of the papers I wrote for my bachelor's degree involved me sitting there and translating a wall of hieroglyphics.
What was their cosmology?
Their cosmology was a flat Earth cosmology. That's
of course that the whole world was, right? Yeah. And they knew that the sky reset, and this is how we got day and night cycle and time.
No, they thought the sky reset, but their own records prove, when you take a look at them and take a look at the modern sky, that they were incorrect, and that while the sky reset to the limits of their observations, it did not entirely reset to the limit of ours. The precession of equinoxes is a measurable phenomenon.
Okay.
We can measure it in real time. It happens. The stars do not all go back to their same position every year. Further,
but they never change.
Absolute motion is also a thing. Stars move relative to each other.
To one another, though.
That's not true. Absolute motion or proper motion of stars is also a measurable phenomenon. There are stars with greater or lower proper motion. Yeah, stars move in relation to each other. I just read a Harvard
paper last week, dude, that disagrees with you, bro.
So you think that proper motion of stars doesn't exist? That's your claim?
No. The absolute motion, the fixed position of the star, the fixed position of the stars relative to one another do not change.
That's what proper motion of stars is. It's a thing.
So you're saying the fixed position of stars do change?
Yes, because proper motion is a thing. I mean, every single star has proper motion. Do you want me to give you like the value for a given star?
I'll just link Harvard, which believes the Earth is a spinning ball that defies physics, and they say that the fixed positions of the stars relative to one another do not change in our sky. But what they say is they do not perceive to ever change, but we know they change. It just takes so long to change.
So when someone measures proper motion, what are they measuring?
I don't know. Like when they're measuring the sky, the stars move a little bit, but they keep on going in their cycle. But they don't move like if they're the same relative to one another. Like for all recordable history, highest levels of education admit this. So they say that they don't change because it takes millions and millions and millions of years for us to ever.
They say that they don't perceptibly change to your eyes, which is true. But when you get high precision measurements of the angle between stars, proper motion is one of the results, because when you measure, well, first you start out by identifying close stars via parallax, which means that from one point in the year to the other, 6 months apart, the exact position of nearby stars will shift noticeably on precision telescopes. Then you measure that, and now you have, based on basic trigonometry, the distance to that star. Then if you can measure those stars' positions and, continue checking for parallax, if the star drifts in relation to the background stars over time, which they do, that is proper motion. That is the change in position of that star in the night sky as a result of that star moving through these physical axes that we get, that is space, whether or not it's empty or whatever it is, it's still a physical set of
It
coordinates.
cannot be empty, bro. It can't be empty, but
Okay,
do
but they still move through it.
do they
Observably,
come back?
measurably.
Do they come back every year?
What do you mean by come back?
Do
They
they
never
reset every year?
At the end, after an entire orbit around the sun, or a season cycle, or whatever you want to define it by, the stars will be in very similar positions to where they were the previous cycle, but no, they will not be in the exact same position because proper motion exists and is measurable. However, if you were to look at it with your naked eye, that will be an undetectable amount of change because your eyes are not as sensitive as a high-precision telescope. Because high-precision telescopes are the size of large cars, and your eyes are the size of like a sugar cube, and so they do not have the same resolution.
Bro.
How can I what?
This is, again, I'm not trying to be rude, right? This requires so much presupposed stuff that you're saying right now, dude. You're saying, well, this is what Harvard said. I read it last week. They said that you don't see them changing, but we know that they're changing ever slightly because of the 11 vectors that the Earth experiences. That's what Harvard says, right? Okay, so then they have to assume the distances and the sizes.
No, those are measured.
I say that for not an assumption.
They can literally measure those, though.
Okay, so an assumption...
Are 17 trillion light years away.
First, I'm going to say one thing. This is something I mentioned before in a few other videos. An assumption in science is not something that you simply make up. It is a conclusion from earlier science. So, for instance, if I decide I want to make a 1 pound block of gold, and I want to make it out of a cube, right? So I need to know what volume of gold I need to get to make a 1 pound cube of gold. I assume the density of gold because someone else already measured it. But that doesn't mean I'm making it up.
That's not analogous.
It is, because the distance to stars is not assumed. It's first measured, and then later, after the measurement is well established, then future studies can assume it. Now, how you measure this... We did not
measure the distance to stars, bro.
We did. First of all, the first method, there's a sequence of overlapping techniques. The first method is parallax, which we've already described.
A calculative deduction based on the assumption of the heliocentric model. That's not a measurement.
Trigonometry has always worked in all circumstances where it has been directly tested. There is no circumstance in which trigonometry has failed. So
there's a difference in planar and spherical, right?
Great, but because you only need 3 points of measurement, we can use planar trigonometry because any 3 points will define a plane as long as they're not collinear.
So you use planar?
Yeah, because any 3 points that are non-collinear define a plane. So you don't need to use any special geometry. You can just use planar trigonometry if you have only 3 points to measure, which is all that's used for stellar parallax.
So you're using triangulation?
Yes.
Okay, so does triangulation require the actual location of the third point?
No. It requires you to have the actual location of 2 points, and then the unknown point is calculated based on trigonometry. That's what triangulation is.
No, but if you're taking your angles and you're pointing them to an apparent location of a star, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to have a actual location being deduced using triangulation and trigonometry, your third point has to be the actual location. You're measuring the angle to the apparent location, and then you are conflating that into the actual location. You also have to assume sphericity, and you have to know the size of the Earth to do this.
Well, those are things that are well established, so there you go.
Once again, most people would think that on the surface. That is not the case, my friend. The size of the Earth is not well established.
It absolutely is. It's been measured countless times by people for the past few thousand years, and all of them have come up with answers that, given the margin of error for their instruments, agree with the general consensus. And I'm going to close the window here.
We're not far off, weren't they? How far off were they again?
The Greeks. You're talking about Aristophanes?
Well, that's one of them.
Aristophanes was the first one, right?
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure, dude. Okay. He was the first.
I mean, I don't care to say that can't be the case. I'm willing to grant it.
No. I'm just trying to let you know. I've really looked into this in depth, bro. I thought it sounded crazy too, man.
I got to be honest with you. You've been polite and friendly here, and so I'm not trying to be mean. But if you say that the Earth is flat and then also say that you've looked into it, it's kind of like saying, "Oh yeah, Santa's totally real. I looked into it."
You just told me you don't even know how the Earth was measured, though.
I didn't say that.
So how is it that you're coming from a place of ignorance?
I did not say that we don't know how the Earth is measured. The Earth has been measured in numerous ways, one of which is doing things like lining up shadows like Eratosthenes did. But other things include things like looking at the deviation from the planar prediction and triangles measured by surveyors. Other things include things like actually just leaving the planet and looking behind you.
You're scattergunning, bro. We can take them one at a time, man. So Eratosthenes is the first person attributed to founding the circumference, okay? He went out and he took the shadows measurements of 2 sticks in the ground, right? 500 miles apart. He did not verify the distance because there was no
500 stadia, but
there was no primary documentation of this. Did you know that?
oh, okay.
Okay, now it doesn't matter because we can replicate this today.
Right.
When we replicate it today, you get the exact same shadows on a spherical and a flat surface.
No,
the only
you
difference
don't. The results have been done numerous times and tried to be fit to both. You cannot fit those shadows onto a plane.
Okay, so the difference is one assumes a distant sun with parallel rays. If there is a local sun with divergent rays, you get the same results. This can be replicated. I can link you a video where we did it.
For any 2 measurements, you can replicate it with a local sun.
That's what Neil deGrasse Tyson said in the little hit piece that NASA
I'm
did
not
on
Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't care what he said, but the
We
fact
did it
is,
ourselves.
any 2 data points can be explained by any position and size of the sun that you can care to fit to it. Well, okay, let me rephrase. Any 2 points of data from that kind of experiment, you can explain with a single sun that is local and small. Adding any 3rd point will resolve the problem. And the problem is that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, into the dozens of extra points have been added, and the only possible arrangement, the only one that actually fits the geometry, is a distant sun.
Did you know the accuracy is actually disproportionate to the increase in the amount of measurements?
No, it's not, because the more measurements you get, the better triangulation you get, and you can only
That's what you
converge
would
on
think.
one.
We're not trying. What are we triangulating?
You're triangulating the position of the sun if you're trying to determine how far away the sun is.
No, that's not what we're trying to determine. We're trying to determine if the Earth's a ball or not.
Well, part of that would help is knowing how far the sun away the sun is.
Right. So you have to assume a distant sun with parallel rays, and when you increase over 2, it actually decreases accuracy the more you add points to it. You can go out and do this yourself. I
don't have to. Numerous people already have, and the only mathematical conclusion they came to that worked was that 1, the Earth is a globe, and 2, the sun is about 98 million miles if we want to use miles because it's America.
Merca.
Exactly.
93 million miles, yeah.
Yeah. On average, that's the mean orbital distance. It's not always the exact distance.
But that's the AU, right?
Yeah, that's 1 AU. The mean orbital diameter of the Earth's orbit is what the definition of an AU is.
Changed 6 times in like the last couple hundred years. But anyway.
I mean, established measurements always become more precise as better equipment is
but we went from 3 to 6 to 18 to 40 to 90 to 108.
No, it started out when the Earth was first discovered to be a sphere as being, quote, large, because essentially it was far enough away that it was indistinguishable from an infinite distance. But it was known not to be infinite because right there, you can see it. So it went from large, and then the measurements that were made tended to fall with additional precision within the error margin of previous measurements, which is also the case for things like the circumference of the Earth. The exact official value that you might find in a textbook may have changed, but that's because there's always a plus or minus. And so if I say that, this ball is 100 feet around, this is just a hypothetical ball, give or take 10 feet, and that's the circumference, 100 feet plus or minus 10. And then someone else comes and says, well, actually, the ball is 108 feet plus or minus 4. Okay, that's still within I was still right there when I said. But then if someone else comes in and says, well, actually, it's 106 feet plus or minus 2, well, so far we're still all right. We're just getting more precise. And that is the general trend in measurements like the speed of light, the circumference of the Earth, the distance to the sun. While the actual mode of the measurements, or whatever statistical average you want to use, whether it be mean or mode or median or whatever, does tend to shift around a bit, as time goes on, you'll find that it tends to center around an actual point. And at this point, we have levels of precision for measurements like this that are within, several decimal points, like, 7 or 8 in many cases, which is enough for you to do any calculation you would ever need to in your regular life.
Okay. To be fair, bro, I know that this is not what we're supposed to be talking about. And
Yeah, it's an
I
after
think-
show. We're supposed to talk about whatever.
Okay, if you insist we talk about this, this is my bread and butter, bro. But I will just say I think you're cool. You know, I think you seem pretty cool, man. I don't want you to come in here where I'm kind of waiting for the decapitation. You know what I'm saying? Because objectively, there's no primary documentation for Aristophanes, so we don't even know that the dude actually existed. But one thing we definitely don't know is that he did this. And so the question should arise to you if you're being intellectually honest. Well, why did they run with it as if it was a definitive confirmation of a circumference when there's literally not one piece of primary documentation that the dude even did it?
Well,
right?
so
I mean, you can repeat the test.
the first big thing is I don't care if Aristophanes lived or did this. The fact is that we have modern examples that are essentially the same experiment. So it doesn't matter because the thing is, it's sort of like when people go on about, what things that Darwin says. I don't hugely care about Darwin. He's a dead guy who came up with an idea that has...
Dude, I just said that, bro.
Right. I don't care what the historical documentation is about Aristophanes, but also, it was not the case that he was trying to confirm the globe. He was trying to measure the globe because it was already confirmed.
This is inaccurate, man. I would love to tell you what really happened, but you'll have to let me finish the sentences, man.
Go ahead.
So, objectively, this is what they say was the first time that we established the circumference.
No.
That is objectively what your paradigm claims. The risk came from Platonism that evolved into Neoplatonism, right? The idea that the perfect shape is a sphere. That's attributed to Plato. Then this evolved into Aristotle attributing a privation to space. Then, assuming the Earth to be a sphere based on it being the perfect shape, he went out there, he used spherical trigonometry. Well, if you use spherical trigonometry, you're assuming the Earth's a sphere, bro. Then he had to assume the Earth was very distant from the sun. And he actually assumed that it was 18 times further than the moon, which of course they now say is 400 times further. So he's nowhere even in the ballpark of what they claim now. It doesn't really matter. You have to assume that it's a sphere. The very methodology itself is a presupposition, right? It's a reification of sphericity, but it's even worse than that because there was no primary documentation for this. And then you fast forward to Al-Biruni, who said he got the radius. Okay, so my point was not that I know we can replicate it now. That wasn't my point. My point was if you're being intellectually honest, you would have to question, why was this run with and acted as if it was 100% a fact to happen? And NASA just put out a video last year saying that it happened, but there's literally no primary documentation for it. That shows dishonesty. That's
okay. So, as someone with a history degree, let me tell you why this is a reasonably well-supported story. Then I will tell you why it doesn't really matter, and then I will continue on a little bit from there. So, the reason it's considered to be a reasonable story as something that probably happened is there's nothing particularly unusual about it. We know that Greek philosophers were present in Egypt at the time because it was the Ptolemaic period, which is a time and period in which essentially Greek-descended monarchs were in charge of Egypt after Alexander the Great conquered it and his empire split up. We know that the Greeks had long established that the Earth was a sphere on the basis primarily of astronomy, but also observations around sailing. So it was not simply philosophical mention. The fact is that the positions of the stars and different locations on Earth do not actually line up under any model other than that the Earth is a sphere.
Scattergunning, but that's not true either, man.
I'm telling you the answer to your question. Now, why I don't care is because all of the experiments done in, the early centuries, or I suppose the late centuries BC, the small number centuries BC, because the reason I don't really care is because all of the observations today, and I want to make this extremely clear, every single observation that has ever been done has gone both into confirming the scientific consensus on the shape of the Earth and the general structure of the solar system. Every single one. Not a single one has ever contradicted any of the predictions and alternate ideas about the construction of the Earth and solar system do not make novel testable predictions that have ever come out correct.
And Dapper, if I may, I don't know if you're going to end this soon.
I will actually, because we've been going for about 2 hours and it's about midnight here.
Yeah, I want to go to bed.
Yeah.
Question before you.
Well, let's get final thoughts.
I didn't mean to do this, bro. I didn't want to come in here and talk to you about how dinosaurs are clearly pseudoscience, as is evolution, and you just presuppose timelines that you can't verify. But my point, and the Bible is actually literally accurate. But my whole point here is, dude, I thought it was crazy when I first heard that the Earth could be flat. I thought, wow, 21st century, there are people stupid enough to think this. What have we devolved into? But believe it or not, I don't receive death threats, and
I hope you don't.
I'm saying I don't receive death threats and jeopardize future unemployment and all this for no reason, bro. I've been researching it diligently for 5 years. We actually falsified the radius. You said all observations are consistent with the globe Earth. They are not, dude. We simply see way too far everywhere over the Earth, right? We have an observation where the radius would have to be 250,000 miles, okay? We falsified their radius. That means they couldn't have gone to space because you can't go to space if you don't know the radius. The first person that said he got the radius, he was looking at the horizon, measuring angle depths, taking an approximation, assuming a sphere based on the assumption of the sphere based on north, south, and east circumference. Okay, none of this is science. First of all, the shape of the Earth isn't a science question; that's a measurement question. Okay, we went out and measured the Earth ourselves. Now we have an opportunity here to do two things. We can either go try to verify it ourselves, which we did, or we can just trust NASA alone to say, well, all of our observations, the eyes are tricking us, right? We have an observation where I'm almost done. I'm sorry, bro, but we have an observation from 273 miles away where we see a mountain. The top of it should be hidden by a mile of Earth curvature. So if the Earth's a ball, that means that mountain had to loom up 1 mile and then stop where it would look like it's flat. Our eyes are tricking us. It's a mirage, but it's where it would be if it was flat. So come to find out, the ancient texts were literally accurate, right? And it's worth looking into without bias, my man. You know, we can do it ourselves. We don't need the government to tell us what to think.
Okay, and Jason, do you have a final thought?
Well, I just had a question that I was having a little trouble finding out for myself.
Oh, yeah.
You had a history degree, degree on top of it. Do you happen to know what base mathematics system that the ancient Greeks used to count with? Because I'm very curious about that.
So the Greeks had a couple. Eventually, they ended up going to a base 10 along with most of the rest of Europe. But I'm trying to remember because I'll be honest, my Greek is not as great as say. Actually, oddly enough, I think my Egyptian might be better than my Greek, believe it or not. But I think ancient Greece might have used they had a weird one. Was it base 13?
Oh man, it's all Greek to me.
Babylonians used a base 60, like some of the oldest ones.
The Babylonians definitely used 60, but
the reason why I asked, I had a very interesting conversation between my friend Jaron and I a couple weeks ago, and we were trying to figure out how it might change just the way everything is looked at. And we were like, okay, so what did the Greeks use?
So let's see. For the Arab world, it's the numeral system.
So I'm trying to double check because it's been a while since I looked into ancient Greek mathematics. Although they had some interesting, they did a lot with geometry, but like their arithmetic kind of didn't catch on with their weird counting system.
The way they used the numbers, if I remember correctly, too, like their actual numbering system, like pre Arabic numerals, like taking over everything.
So interestingly, you can, in terms of base systems, you can actually get a hint of a base 12 system in English. That's why we have words like dozen, gross, and great gross. Those are all base 12 counting numbers. So a dozen is 12 to the first, a gross is 12 to the second, and a great gross is 12 to the third. And so you can actually go all the way up to 12 to the third, and you basically can go all the way to just below 12 to the fourth in English without inventing any new number terms, just doing base 12. So you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, a dozen and 1, a dozen 2, all the way up to 2 dozen, and then you can get up to 11 dozen and 11, and then you can get to a gross. So also, if you look at a lot of Romance languages, you'll hear the echoes of an earlier base 20 counting system. So for instance, like in French, if you want to say 93, you have to start by saying 80, which is 4 20s. So now you're at 80. And then you say 19, which is 10, 9. So in order to say 99 in French, you have to say 4 20s, 10, 9. Because Latin started out with a base 20 numbering system. That's why you get a unique number for Vigente, it's 20. Up until then, you're still getting unique numbers up until Vigente. Then sort of the 20 base system starts taking off with somewhat regular patterns. The adoption of the base 10 numeral system ultimately derives from India, which is where the Arabs got their so-called Arabic numerals. And then they imported them into Europe, mostly into Andalusia, which was Moorish-controlled Spain, and then that from there filtered back into Europe, which was in the Middle Ages, which at the time was sort of making a mix of Roman numerals and the Arabic numerals that they'd gotten ultimately from India, but most directly from the Moorish Arabs in Spain. And that's how eventually we settled on our base 10. I actually would have preferred to keep a base 12 system. It makes a lot of math easier, like just basic arithmetic, everyday stuff. But no one agrees with me enough to change how we count.
I'm sorry, Dapper, that's heresy.
I know, we have to stick with base 10, even if it's stupid.
Think about what you've done while in the storm, besides where to send you to the labor camp or execution.
Look, I will die on this hill. The good number bases are 6, 8, 12, and 16. Fight me.
Okay.
So those are the good bases for a numeral system. 10 is not on the list. 10 is stupid. Get out of here.
All right, bro. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm sorry, bro. I'm trying to end
worries.
this. I promise, man.
So, unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head what the base for base numeral system was for Greek. But
Later.
Take care, man.
Bye.
So yeah, sorry. But did you have any final wrap up thoughts before we head out of here?
No, thanks for having me. I'm always open for big open discussions. It's my favorite thing to do. So
Absolutely. Well, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's very nice to meet you. I really enjoyed. Very nice to meet everybody. And let me know if you want me around for anything else. I'll try and interject more. I didn't want to see things get into a flat Earth discussion because I know that there's...
Witsy Gitsy came on. It's hard for it to go anywhere else.
Yeah,
I didn't expect that.
There are some things that I couldn't... I could bring up to you, but you couldn't argue them because it's not you. It's like, well, why are certain things happening with NASA footage and things like that? That's not something that, like... It's not a fact or not a fact. It's just like...
I might, in some cases, know the answer. But not in many cases. I mean, I haven't spent my life doing forensic analysis of NASA footage, so...
Right. Yeah, I haven't either. Just like the things, like I look at all... I try to be so objective about things. And the one thing I am into is audio and video. I'm primarily an audio engineer, but I taught myself video in the past 2 years because I made a film. And it did very well on an indie level. Thank you. Yeah, I made a documentary about Crow's work, and I won 8 awards for it. And I learned a hell of a lot about video layering and just all the crazy stuff that goes with it. And that's where, like, when I was revisiting NASA footage, I'm like, that's not how things work. Like, I know that now. So it's things like that I'm like, and that doesn't prove whether the Earth is flat, doesn't prove whether space is real. It's not. What it proves to me is that, hey, I have questions about footage you're showing us that's supposed to be quote unquote legit, and I'm seeing things fail that shouldn't hypothetically fail, you know? So that's where a lot of where I come from on that. It's like there's some things that need answering there that aren't readily available, but that's not it's not a final proof positive of anything. I think it's there's a lot of other things that would need to be discussed besides that. And I'm not the person to do it. I'm not one who argues for flat. You know, I don't care what shape the Earth is. I doubt very much, as cool as I think it would be. I don't think I'll ever get to space if it does exist as described. But you never know.
It's possible. It's one of those things where if you look into the cost to lift a particular unit weight into space, because that's all that matters is how much it weighs. Basically, size in terms of like volume is almost meaningless because pretty much everything is made to be as compact as it can be. But yeah, it's in the tens of thousands for just a small amount of weight. So it's not impossible to get to space. Also, weather balloons can do it. But we also have a 5 pound, that's British pound, super chat from Hawkskull, who says, why did the mathematician confuse Christmas and Halloween? Because December 5th equals October 31. There you go.
Now, the one thing I would love to know after all these decades is why don't they have some kind of propulsion other than chemical rockets? It's like, come on, where's the electromagnetic stuff? We know that works.
They do. So there are ion engines which work by using essentially high voltage chambers to ionize gas, which are then expelled via electromagnets. It has a couple of limits in that, one, in order to effectively ionize these things and expel them, they have to be relatively light, so it doesn't have a whole lot of thrust. Also, it has heavy power requirements, so you have to have a lot of batteries and maybe an onboard reactor or solar panels.
Yeah, the only way I see ion engines being used in the future is on space-only craft.
I mean, they're used right now.
It's like main thrust for like big spacecraft.
So, but there are also there are technologies that we know work, but we don't use mostly as a result of international treaty. So, for instance, the nuclear bomb drive totally works. And it's where you have a blast plate at the rear of your spacecraft, and you launch an actual literal atomic bomb out the end. And after a set timer, it goes off and pushes you forward. We know this works. All of the physics lines up. Atomic blasts produce pressure waves. There's no question that it works. But there are numerous international treaties that prohibit the deployment of any nuclear weapon in space for any purpose. So it's illegal to build this ship.
It was the Russians that developed that, right?
I mean, it's been hypothesized by a few people. I'm not sure who the first one was. But I mean,
the moment you do it, you're going to have a zillion people going, do that less.
Well, the idea was originally that you don't engage this drive until you're pretty high up in the atmosphere, or not actually out of the atmosphere, basically. So one of the things about chemical rockets is that in terms of in atmosphere, they're pretty handy for a number of reasons. One is you can have essentially zero exhaust rockets where the only thing they exhaust is water, which is actually one of the most common rocket fuels. It's called hydrolox, so it's liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and you ignite those in the ignition chamber. And I mean, as I think most people here know, what you get when you burn oxygen and hydrogen together is water vapor. So it's a very eco-friendly exhaust. It's literally just steam. It's the same as your exhaust from your kettle. It's like, what are you going to do? Complain about the water we're pumping into the air? Oh no! So that's one of the big things there. Is it's reasonably reliable. It can be reasonably clean, and especially in cases like hydrolox. If you're using like kerosene or something, yeah, it's going to be dirtier. But and also it's just one of those things where alternate propulsion methods have been used. Like there have been airlift, where you have a spacecraft piggyback on the back of a plane, and then it engages its rockets after being lifted by jets to a certain height to reduce the cost, because jets are more efficient than rockets up into a certain height. So we've done things like that. It just turns out that in terms of simplicity of the launch profile and overall pollution and cost effectiveness, the chemical rockets most of the time win if your goal is to put something in low Earth orbit. If your goal is to go interplanetary, then you'll usually get into orbit on chemical rockets, and then you have some more options. We also have things that we know they should work, but we haven't implemented them, like light sails. There's no reason a light sail wouldn't work. Sorry, George, if you decide to watch this. Yes, the physics is very well established. You can make your own light sail at home with a vacuum chamber and some foil and a little flywheel. Don't worry, it'll work just fine. I have a friend named George who just insists that the whole concept is completely insane, even though you can just do it at home. You can just make a solar sail.
Solar sails are so neat. I like those.
Yeah, so we do have options, but at a certain point, it's kind of like, how come it's been so many thousands of years, but we're still driving on wheels? It's like, well, wheels are great. Why would you want to stop? Yeah.
Okay, Dapper, the only way I accept solar sails being used is on a space boat. It has to look like a historical sail ship.
Oh, here's one thing. So here's one of my nitpicks on Star Trek, because you guys know how, while I both like Star Trek, I also like to nitpick it. There's an episode of Deep Space Nine where Cisco and his son Ben get into a light sail ship, and then in the course of a few weeks end up in Cardassia after leaving from Bajor. And it's like, okay, so light sails propelled you faster than the speed of light? That's a good, neat trick.
Yeah. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, the way that works is because the writers don't think about it that hard.
Well, it's interesting that they would do that, though, because Star Trek normally has a scientist on retainer to, hey, go over our technobabble and make it work as well as possible.
They do, but ultimately the writers get the final say, and if they just don't care, then they just don't care. That's how.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that in Star Trek where it's like, guys, just don't make no sense. And I was like, but it made for a good story. And it did make for a good story. Yeah. All right, so Sal, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yes, this was a very interesting discussion, and I actually didn't know that this was talking about flat Earth. I didn't mean to.
Well, it wasn't originally.
I didn't mean to pretty far from the original or anything. That was just an accident. So I feel really sorry about that. But you were mentioning standard model and all, and I was just like, oh man. I was a physics student, and every school has its specialty, and particle physics and nuclear physics was just not anywhere in my curriculum. And
it's a struggle for me too, man.
I'm
coming at this as a history major. How do you think I feel? Come on.
I mean, what I felt bad about is like you guys know more about this than I do.
Oh.
So this is a very interesting discussion. I appreciate your civility because one way we actually learn accepted theories is to understand the theories that got rejected.
Yeah.
And when I was, some of the first days in certain classes, they would say, okay, these were the competing theories. This is why these are the observations and the experiments that ruled in favor of one theory over another.
Mm-hmm.
So I always found that valuable. So I'm sorry I missed your debate.
Oh, it's fine, Sal. Don't worry about it.
But I might listen in on it. You're very articulate, and so hi, David, and so
Hey, Sal.
and Jason, we've met for the first time.
Yeah. Hey, Sal. Good to see you again. I was just
Good to see you.
coming back from
Yeah.
standing stream.
Unfortunately, we're in the wrap-up phase, so...
Let's
Okay,
go
sure. Real quick.
I look forward to. I didn't realize you got my email, and thank you for entertaining the idea that we will meet on Modern Day Debate. That would be an enormous help to my building.
Yeah,
up my-
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a decent platform for that. We'll get a pretty good audience, and then if you want, we can even do like an after show on your channel, Sal. I don't mind doing that.
Oh, nice.
All right. Well, thank you. That'd be
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Real quick, Dapper. I guess if you want.
Yeah. What
Just
are your
real
final, initial and final thoughts?
Sure. So my initial thoughts is that you completely slaughtered the. They have to be a Poe. They really have to be a Poe.
I suspect Alex is, yes.
Yeah, but and again, I think it would have been so much better. It would have been so much a more peaceful debate if it was just you versus Rose, because Rose at least seems to be a person who actually wants to learn.
Mm-hmm.
She may be self-deluded, but she at least has demonstrated that she's willing to learn and change her mind, which Alex obviously is not. I think Alex is a bad faith actor, and he should not be platformed.
So I will say this. I do intend to have further online interaction with Rose. I have no particular interest in further communication with Alex, mostly because it's not communication. It's him taking something you said, saying something mostly unrelated except thematically, and then declaring his victory after having not made an argument.
Yeah, and clearly contradicting himself so many times.
Yes.
Dinosaurs are a hoax, but also we have soft tissue. Like, what? That's literally a contradiction in your own worldview.
Mm-hmm. And also, of course, like I said, Jason, I also am more than happy for those interactions with Rose to include you. She invited me to come on her channel. I don't know if that's also a channel that you're helping run. I'm not sure exactly what the
Which
status
runs our
is.
own channel, but I mean, I'm around. We live together.
Right, yeah. So yeah, I don't know all the details about how the various channels work, but yeah, she did invite me to come on at some point, and I'm open to having her on at some point. Maybe we can do like a part 1 on one channel, part 2 on the other. But yeah, so I would be happy to have you on for that too, because you seem like a nice enough dude who's willing to ask questions and actually listen to the answers, which is a surprisingly rare thing, I find, in certain circles.
I'm a bad conspiracy theorist.
Oh no!
All right. I got a little meme that's relevant because 2 days yesterday.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to make it fast. So
Turkey Day. So yeah, because
here it is. Yeah, I've got my own problem. Oh my goodness, PETA.
Yeah. Anyway, real quick, should I ask you the question before or after you end the stream?
As long as it's something I can answer quickly, you might as well just ask it now.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So, how does like a formation like the Karu supergroup with all these millions of fossils form? So, with all these fossils seeming to be in the same location. I'm not quite sure.
These large fossil-bearing strata usually are the result of various seas. So in the case of, I'm trying to remember exactly where the Karoo Formation is, but we'll just go with things like, say, the Western Interior Seaway, which have similar amounts of fossil-bearing strata that are more or less continuous across the entire middle section of North America. It's essentially that, yeah, there's an extensive depositional environment that occurs persistently through time. So in the future, the Gulf of Mexico is going to be like this. It will be a location where there has been constant sedimentation of a very similar type for millions of years. And then if it were to, say, be uplifted by, say, volcanic activity or something like that, you would now get a new terrestrial environment that had one of these gigantic formations. So if you want to find a place like the Karoo Basin forming now, just check out the Gulf of Mexico.
The Mediterranean is actually an interesting little example of what probably the inland sea between India and Asia was like before the Himalayas became a thing.
Yeah, actually the Mediterranean is another example that eventually it will dry up again and it might open up again. But when it does dry up, it will in fact just be a deposition that is newer than the Karoo Basin, but is essentially the same kind of thing. Oh, the Karoo Basin is one of the ones in Australia, isn't it?
The Karoo, I think that one's Africa, I believe.
That's South Africa.
Oh, is it South? Goodness, there's so many darn geological formations. I cannot keep them all straight. I'm sorry.
Shall I call the Commissar?
Yeah, seriously, shoot me for heresy right now. But anyway, so my final thoughts are: one, I never answered the question of what my favorite dinosaur is. Of course, it is Meleagris gallopavo. I almost said Gallus, which is Beethoven's favorite.
I had that yesterday.
Yes, Meleagris gallopavo is, of course, my favorite dinosaur because it is the most delicious dinosaur that I can get regular access to. Although I will say, I miss my roast duck from my trips to Korea.
Oh, duck is delicious.
Yeah,
I never had
roast duck.
Yeah, I never had roast duck, but duck is something that I want to try.
My dad made a killer
tricky.
duck for lunch.
Do not get your first duck from someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Get your first duck roasted by someone who knows how to cook duck, because duck is easy to ruin.
Yeah, maybe like a Chinese place that...
I used to get it all the time from one before I became a vegetarian.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
They served it with plum sauce. It was amazing.
Nice. All right, but anyway, that is all for us. Thank you very much, everyone who came. I want to say a special thank you to everyone who super chatted and super stickers. So we've got Rodent, no last name, Zach Brannigan, Silfredo Sarabia, Vandalia 1998, and of course Witsit Gets It, as well as Hawkskull, who came in there towards the end with that £5 super chat. I almost said euro. Like, I don't know what the pound sign looks like. But anyway, thank you, everybody. We're going to get our little outro credit scene, and then I am going to hit end stream. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I'd like to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above: Beethoven, Ian Chen, Sphincter of Doom, Chris Love, Henry Hutanen, and Bob Knob. Their support helps make this channel possible, because as you may know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and they give this channel much needed additional stability. If you'd like to join the team, a link to my Patreon page can be found in the description, and you can join with the button right below this video on YouTube. Both groups of people get access to my special patron and member-only Discord channel, links to new videos before I release them to the public, as well as a pretty direct line to me. They also often are asked to do things like vote on new video topics. If a monthly subscription isn't something that you'd like to do, but you'd still like to help out the channel, I also have a Teespring store that has Dapper Dino merch, including mugs, blankets, pillowcases, shirts, all sorts of things. And if none of those things are for you, then please just remember to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video. All of those things really do help the channel